Welcome back to the State of the Arc podcast. My name is Mike.
My name's Kason.
Today we are doing our second episode of our long-form analysis of Final Fantasy VIII. For this episode, we played from the end of the Dalit mission through the end of Disc 1, which culminates in the failed assassination attempt on the Sorceress Edea. As was true for the first episode, we will not be referencing or talking about events that have not happened yet in the playthrough. So, full spoilers on all of Disc 1, no spoilers on anything that happens after Disc 1. Let's talk about what we played for this episode. You want to hit us up with a bit of summary?
Yeah, absolutely. So at the end of the Dalit mission, of course, Seifer, during the mission, he kind of takes things into his own hands and abandons his post. And, you know, he gets poor marks for that later on. Mm-hmm. But they also kind of ditch us when we get back to the port, and him and Raijin and Fujin get in the car and just like leave. And so we have to like walk back to
That's right. They just take
Balamb
the
Garden.
car
Yeah.
and they just let you walk back.
And then Zell is just like, oh man, they got us again, you know?
Yeah.
He's so funny. But you kind of, you have a good opportunity there before you go back to Balamb Garden to kind of explore that town, because I think that's where Zell is from.
Yeah.
And in fact, his mother is still there, and you can kind of go and meet people from that town, and that's always fun. They do some really cool tricks in that town as you're walking down one of the streets. Mm-hmm. The field of focus, I guess, shifts as you get closer or further away from the camera.
It was actually a note that I had made on the last one that I didn't get to, but I noticed that too.
It's so cool.
It's
I would
really
go
cool.
back and forth just to find the point that it shifts and just to see it go back.
The focus change between the foreground and background.
It's really, really cool because what they were able to do in Final Fantasy VIII with the limitations of the PlayStation 1, and you know, they obviously loaded like 4 discs with one game.
Yeah.
Like they were clearly trying to push it to its limits, but changing the focus, it's such a subtle thing, but it helps make it feel so much more realistic.
There's an attention to detail
very
in
much
these
so.
PlayStation Final Fantasy games with the little things like that.
Specifically 8 and 9.
Yeah. That give it this really just kind of like next level polish feel to it. Right?
Like the parallax as you're approaching Balamb Garden, you walk up the stairs and it's almost as if the camera is like moving upwards, and you're seeing more and more of it get revealed behind, and it's just 2 little layers that they're moving, but it feels epic. It feels really big, and it's stuff that you didn't really see in games as much before.
Yeah, seriously.
So that's super, super cool. And then you go back to Balamb Garden, and you're just kind of waiting around to see if you passed or not. And it's, it's fun, of course. Squall,
there's a couple of
Zell
things.
made it through.
There's a couple of things I want to see if you talk to some of the NPCs and notice this. Because here's one thing that's going to be kind of a theme for my talking points on Final Fantasy VIII in general, and a similarity that we see to the way that they handle world building in Final Fantasy XIII. Most of the world building in Final Fantasy XIII does not happen through dialogue or through the plot.
Okay.
It happens in data logs in the menu.
Oh, well, I did notice one thing I freaking loved about this part of Disc 1, the second half that we just played through, the magazines. You're finding magazines all over the world, and you can choose to read them or not, but as you go through, you learn a little bit more about the world as you go.
It's fascinating. I kind of like that.
I like that
generally as like a way of supplementing the world building so that you don't have to pack your scenes with a ton of exposition. It's because it's like in the world, in real life, I mean, like you're going to read stuff in newspapers or read stuff that will like detail events happening outside of what's happening directly to the characters in that moment.
Well, and that what they usually do is it's a character. You go to the town, you talk to a character, and he goes, "The princess is in the castle," and it's like and they still do that in Final Fantasy VIII.
Yeah.
But they did put some of that. They offloaded it, I guess, onto just a magazine, which is basically an NPC.
Yeah.
It's just a programmed piece of paper, and you can just read it instead of a person telling you, which always feels weird.
Yeah.
You simply read it, and it informs you to whatever degree.
Right.
I prefer that, honestly.
But where I was going with this is there are so many places where it's foreshadowing for like major plot things that is not happening through the main plot. It's happening through characters off to the side, through the desk in the classroom, through
yes.
things in the menu, even in the menu tutorial that I talked about last time, with all that information is in there. This is the first time I've ever accessed it in my 4 playthroughs. This is my 4th or 5th playthrough of the game. It's the first time I've ever looked in there. And it's incredible how much is in there, right? So, I don't know. I don't want to say this as like laying it out, because this was something that bothered a lot of people about Final Fantasy XIII. I don't want to say this in particular to, like, throw shade at Final Fantasy VIII, but just to say how important it is to pay attention to the little things that people say, talk to all the NPCs, and look around a lot, because a lot of the story is actually found there. But when you first get back to the garden, you have Cid and Zoo and Quistis standing there waiting for you to get back. And there's 2 NPCs to the right before you go to them. So if you hook around, they basically talk about the radio interference, right? The worldwide radio interference.
Yeah.
And continue to kind of say, it was 17 years that we've had this radio interference, right? So that's like kind of a little bit of a hint. But then you go into the menu after you talk to them, and you go into like the tutorial terms, and you look at the worldwide radio interference, and it talks about Esthar, right? That there's this country Esthar where the time, essentially the timeline falls in line with Esthar as this like world superpower closing its borders and basically going silent. Ever since that has happened, and nobody has any way of communicating with Esthar, no one has any idea what's going on in Esthar, no one can travel to Esthar. As soon as that happened 17 years ago, this worldwide radio interference has been a problem, and people essentially communicate only through wires underground.
Cable.
Cable, essentially.
Yeah.
But the problem is that sometimes those cables get damaged by monsters in the wild or whatever, and so sometimes they just have no way of communicating with other countries. And so it's created this problem where they can't use wireless communication. A lot of them don't have wired communication, and so the world is essentially really disconnected and unable to really communicate effectively. So if you don't talk to those NPCs, you don't read that stuff in the menus, this mission, this Dalit mission that resulted in this essentially radio tower being reconstructed, it can kind of fall to the wayside a little bit, but this is actually a really important really important thing. And one thing that they say in the tutorial menu terms, where they define it, it's believed to have some relation to the moon, is what it says in the menu tutorial term. So I just want to put this out there if this is your first time playing the game or something like that. I know that in my first playthrough, maybe even second playthrough, I didn't pay attention to this particular plot that much.
Yeah.
And how it relates to other things that are going to come later. But I do think it's important to keep in mind as a mystery, like a major kind of mystery in the game, this idea of worldwide radio interference, and that people are not communicating. And it all has to do with something that happened in Esthar 17 years ago. So I wish that they had set that mystery up a little bit more clearly without making you dig around.
That is definitely something that I missed. And especially I missed it my first playthrough, but even now. And it's funny because sometimes I might even have actually, talked to these people, but you just don't realize. I don't expect to get large game hints through small conversations.
Yeah, and it seems to be something that it happens a lot in Katase Final Fantasy games. Final Fantasy X is a little bit that way, but way more so Final Fantasy XIII, where so much of your understanding of the world or what the fal'Cie want comes from reading data logs and not from the game, the story. Not a lot of that is revealed in the story itself. And anyways, it's just a similarity in like world building tactics, I guess, or technique that I saw between FF8 and some of the later Final Fantasy games helmed by Katase's team. But
I wonder if at some point, as they outlined Final Fantasy VIII, that they determined that the story, because it does kind of get this way, that it was a little bit too much too complicated. And you can still let the people discover it as they will here and there, but maybe not try to connect everything too early.
There is something to be said about pace, right? Like you can bog down the pacing of your storytelling if you're doing too much like exposition laden like dialogue where you're just like setting up the world, right? That can get boring too. Obviously you need to balance that. I would prefer a balance a little bit more of like putting some emphasis on some things like
because that would make it cooler.
Yeah, I think that this is really important to know.
When you first find out about things like Esthar or whatever's going on with the moon, it does kind of come out of nowhere.
Yeah, it feels that way.
Having played the game the first time,
it feels like it's coming out of nowhere, but
like, what the heck?
Isn't if you've talked to the right people. And that's kind of my point. Is that instead of making it this optional thing, like make it a point of reference. It doesn't have to be a super long thing, but just drop the breadcrumbs in the plot, not around it, if that makes sense.
You know, it'd be even worse is if you had to like play cards with people in order for them to tell you info. To like if they put it behind like an even bigger wall than it already is behind, you know?
Yeah.
Okay, so we come back to Balamb Garden, and Seifer is reprimanded for his actions, but even Cid kind of walks up and gives him a little bit of encouragement. They actually hint about this a little later on when Renoa criticizes Squall's like leadership abilities. She's like, you don't give anyone hope ever. You're just always a downer about everything, and you're always like, this is real, this is not real, and you don't like helping people in their problems, right? Well, Cid steps up to Seifer and says, hey, you really shouldn't have done that. But at the same time, we're not raising robots here. We do want you guys to take some kind of initiative.
You see the contrast in Cid's leadership approach.
Which is way better because Seifer, like, if you just do what Squall does, Seifer is just going to rebel, push back, and you're not going to win. You're not going to win. But with Cid doing it both ways, like he didn't give him the seed status, right? He was like, you're not a seed because you screwed up too big. But I like you. You're good, and we need people like you. You know, and that can help. Well, we'll talk about what Seifer does later.
On the back of what Zoo says to him, she's really harsh. Like,
absolutely.
She's basically like, "You're never going to be a seed. You're a freaking joke.
You're never going to be a seed.
Like, screw you." And she just walks away, and he bows his head to that, right? And he gets real down on himself. And Cid trying to like bolster a little bit. Shows good leadership.
I think it shows good leadership. And then, this is important, especially for later on, but the garden's keeper, one of I assumed they were...
Garden faculty members.
If this is your first time playing through, you may just assume these are just janitors. They're just walking around, like, keeping the place clean, keeping it in order. They manage the building, they manage the food and all that. They have a more of a role than that. I'll just leave it at that. But they're kind of hinting at their deeper role with this garden as they keep, and several times it happens here, these garden keepers will walk up. Is that what they're called, keepers?
I just call them garden faculty.
Garden faculty. And they will tell Cid, oh, hold on, Cid, hold on. Don't you have a meeting? Don't you have somewhere to be right now?
They keep undermining.
You get out of here. Anyways, I'm pretty sure what he means is, don't do that, Seifer. You screwed up. You know, because anytime Cid starts, to do things in his own way, the garden faculty step in, and it's almost as if there's a little bit of a power situation here that we're not understanding. And that one you don't necessarily have to go out of your way for. That one, it does seem pretty well laid out in front of you, even though it's easy to not think anything of it. But that is good hinting for what happens later. So
so that would essentially we're going to get to revealing 5 major mysteries that the story sets up by the end of Disc 1, right? And this is the second that I wrote down, is this apparent sort of like tension between Cid and the garden faculty, and they are acting, it seems, almost in opposition to each other behind the backs a little bit.
Yes, right? Except somehow Cid does not appear to have the upper hand here. Whenever there's a headbutting, Cid is the one to back down.
But at the same time, and we'll get to this in a minute, but at the same time, he's like assigning contracts that apparently the garden faculty doesn't really...
That they don't want,
or that they think are bad ideas.
Or they don't make enough money, or
or even to the extent, because, anyways, we'll get to it in a minute, but go ahead.
So Squall and Zell and two others. There's a guy.
There's Selfie and then just another
Selfie
guy.
and then just some guy.
Just some guy.
They become the new seeds, and it's a fun little thing. Selfie's hilarious because it's like they're explaining to her role and like you are now the elite special forces secret like top level, and she's like yippee. Doing her cute poses, pulling up her boot while she like does a peace sign or whatever.
Selfie
and it's like,
is,
you know what? She's a special forces elite agent.
She's the one character in the game. I like the characters in this game.
I actually do, and I even like her. It's just in the situation she's in, it doesn't make sense.
But that's one thing about her. I feel like maybe she would have been better served as a member of the party that joins as not being a seed.
Like Renoa.
Or something like that.
Yeah,
right?
where it's like she can fight, she's good, but she's not.
She doesn't seem to have, I don't know, she just doesn't seem to have any military discipline.
Do you remember her introduction as a character?
She just like falls over, trips over the cliff.
She's so clumsy, and she falls, and then she just laughs about it, and...
She's real ditzy.
She's very ditzy. She's not balanced. She's not coordinated.
It's just she's a strange character, considering she's supposed to be this elite, like special forces agent.
But like you said, I do like her character.
But I like her. I like her, and I like her dynamic with the party. And I'm going to get to that in a bit later, particularly with Squall. But it does seem strange to me that they've tried to sell her as a special forces military person. I'm not convinced.
No, I am not convinced.
I'm not convinced of that. But tying back to the Liberi Fatali,
the song,
which means children of fate in Latin.
Oh, right.
The idea of children rising up, fighting, like being in these positions that children probably shouldn't be in, could potentially be like a major theme, like child soldiers, and whether or not you have the emotional maturity to actually handle these like incredibly
to handle what is
difficult events and the pressure that goes into like executing these missions. Could possibly be something that was maybe like an intentional theme of the game. And so like, yes, it doesn't make any sense why these teenagers are being elevated into these positions and not, say, an older seed member, like maybe someone in the late 20s, somebody maybe Laguna's age.
Experience, yes. Well,
we'll get into Laguna a little bit later.
Yeah.
But anyways, I'm throwing this as like a thing to think about for the audience, and that maybe we'll get into later.
Well, because
this Children of Fate idea, right?
This will be a consistent criticism, and I know they did it on purpose. So we should be ruling on the merits as opposed to just what we think it should. Oh, 16-year-olds shouldn't be in the military. Okay, well, they are in this world, and that's that.
It is what it is.
And it's fine because I do like the characters and. It's an interesting world. It's they do seem to be trying to relate to a somewhat younger audience. So fair enough. This was their artistic decision, and this is how they're doing it. So we just got to live with it. But I'm not convinced.
Yeah, this is another thing. I'll get into this more when we talk about the response to the comments later. But how seriously should we be scrutinizing, or how seriously should we be taking Final Fantasy stories, which are
in general
a little more out there? I mean,
yes.
There's obviously some kind of spectrum where it's like, The Last of Us asks me to take it very seriously, and it. Well, I'm talking about part one. I've not played part two, so let's not.
I'm assuming part two does as well, but.
Well, it does, but what I'm saying is that the first game merits me taking it that seriously. It earns it, and it has, because it has to live up to intense scrutiny.
Yeah.
If it's asking me to believe in it that much and to really take it seriously, I don't think Final Fantasy is asking me to take it as seriously as that.
Sure.
But it's certainly not in the realm of Pokemon or like Mario or something. Where it's like, you're not supposed to think about this. Just play the game and have fun. It's somewhere in between those two things.
Yes.
And so it merits some scrutiny.
Right.
But how much of it, we'll talk about that later.
Okay.
Okay, so
the graduation, and they make it in, and there's immediately after that, there is a ceremony. So...
Oh, before that, though, I did want to mention Seifer. So when you come back... and Seifer
He slow claps.
applauds.
Yep.
I loved this moment.
I thought that was interesting. And everyone kind of joins in.
It clearly sets up Seifer as basically not being the bully archetype.
Yeah.
That type of character
least that's
would
not
normally
all
fit.
he is.
He's not
Yeah.
just Draco Malfoy
Yes.
books 1 through 5 of
until
Harry Potter, right?
Right.
They give a little more dimension to Malfoy in 6.
Right.
But 1 through 5, you know every encounter with Malfoy
He's
and
just
how
trying to
it's going
get
to
your
go.
goat. Yeah.
And he always acts the same. And there's really no dimension to the character. Seifer, on this playthrough especially, and we'll get into more of this a little bit later, I think he actually, for a character that doesn't get a lot of screen time and that doesn't actually do that much,
Actually true.
all said,
That's true.
by the end of the story, he doesn't really do much.
Right.
He's actually a really good character. I think they handle him really well. And there's more to him than just being a bully or a rival to Squall. He's actually a pretty good guy.
He's extremely loyal.
Yeah.
And so are his friends Fujin and Raijin.
Yeah.
Like to a fault, they're insanely loyal.
Yeah.
And that is not a bad quality.
And
Well,
I just
yeah,
loved the
fair enough.
subtlety of that moment too. Like one thing that for me, in my taste in storytelling, that I find really important is being able to not be on the nose, to be able to subtly communicate things to your audience in a way that
Without words.
is more poetic, is more interesting than just like telling them on the nose. And this moment I felt was really strong for that reason. Like Seifer didn't say anything. It was a very short little moment. It's just they clap and then the screen kind of goes black and you just kind of skip ahead to that night. And that's all that needed to happen.
What? Later on in the story, you learn a little bit more from Renoa talking about Seifer.
Yeah.
And they're like, everyone's like, oh man, we didn't really like Seifer. And she kind of stands up and she's like, I really liked him.
Yeah.
And it's funny because even with like Draco Malfoy, that would be like someone like Hermione Granger being like, I really actually really like Draco Malfoy.
Yeah.
That never happens, right? In that story, it doesn't happen. But in this story, you just from her, because what the little we know about her, when she decides, hey, I'm going to stand up for him, I really like him. I actually got him to know him really well last year.
Yeah.
Is like you don't even have to know anything else other than this character who you think is a good person thinks that he's a good person.
Yep.
And you don't need to know any more than that to make your mind start going, whoa, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Because what if Seifer did talk in that moment? What would he have said? He probably would have said like, oh, you don't deserve it or whatever.
Yeah.
But it's almost like brotherly teasing.
Yeah.
Like, because you can read it as bullying.
Yeah.
But at the same time, those same words, you don't know what he's thinking necessarily. And he's clearly a very emotional person.
It's purely emotional.
Pure emotion. And so even if he does say something like, yeah, I could have done it if I wanted to,
Yeah.
it's still some weird screwed up form of an expression of love in some weird kind of way. Or it could be seen as that. But if they put that text there, you wouldn't have read it that way.
Yeah.
You would have still thought he was a jerk bully. So they just didn't do anything there. I agree.
I love that. I just love that moment. It might have been
Really cool moment.
It's among my top 2 or 3 favorite moments
Of the whole game?
of this first
Of the
disc.
whole disc. Okay, cool.
Of this first disc of Final Fantasy VIII. I just, especially on this playthrough, it just really stuck out to me as like that was a really nice storytelling moment. Yeah. Like they said a lot with no words.
And that's I think that is the last time we see him
until the radio.
The end. Yeah.
The television,
the
the
end of
TV
disc one.
station.
Yeah.
Later on, yeah.
So that's an interesting note to leave him on. So that also was very, very well done.
Liked it.
So they go to the ball. They go to this big dance, and Renoa's there, and it's for the new seeds. And she mentioned something about how he's supposed to give a speech. We didn't hear him give a speech, but he goes and dances. And
Yeah,
at
they kind of
first,
skipped past that. Didn't they,
at
the
first,
speech?
he's like, "I don't dance. That's not a thing that I do. Right? Don't make me do it." And he's kind of being a little rude to Renoa, as he commonly. That's
Well,
a theme throughout the whole game.
and to Selfie and Zell before that, because Zell comes up and is like, "Hey man, put it
Yeah,
there,"
and he
won't
doesn't-
shake his
he won't shake
hand,
his
and he
hand.
turns away. Actually,
That seemed a little
every
over the top to me.
time someone tries to shake Squall's hand,
Yes, 'cause
Zone
that
tries to
happened, Zone,
later.
yeah.
Like anytime, I think somebody else tries to shake his
He
hand.
won't shake
He
anyone's
will
hand.
not shake hands
What
with
do you
people.
make of that? Because I noticed it, but I didn't really think anything of
I mean, I'm going to talk
Other
about.
than
I'm
he's
going to talk
being a-
more about Squall specifically as we get to his moment
Timber.
with Quistis here in a minute.
Oh, okay, good. 'Cause
So we'll
I'm
get back
getting
to this. But yes, I just wanted to point out just like insanely closed off to people. He
Like
will
to
not connect with anyone.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, he's super rude to Renoa, and
Especially to Renoa.
she just doesn't.
She is so open for him, and he just is like not having it. And so she eventually forces him onto the dance floor, and he screws up over and over and over. It doesn't work. He's not a good dancer. And then something clicks, and it just works, and he's able to actually complete the whole dance. And I remember initially thinking, that's kind of weird, like all of a sudden he's a good dancer now, like what happened? But they actually do talk about this later.
They do explain it,
In Timber, she goes, hey, so it turns out seeds can dance. And he goes, yeah, you never know when you're doing a secret mission if you're going to need to be able to woo a woman or do...
You need these skills.
You need to be able
for
to
subterfuge,
approach someone in a dance. Yeah, for subterfuge. And she's like, oh, so it's just part of your job. And he's like,
yeah, totally.
And so that's fascinating, though, because at first he just doesn't want to dance.
He just didn't want to.
It's not that he can't.
It's not that he couldn't. He just did not want to.
He really didn't want to. And so Renoa's the character that kind of pushes him out of his comfort zone over and over and over. Aerith was kind of that for Cloud in a lot of ways. Renoa is that for Squall. So
there was actually a pretty nice leitmotif in that ball
in the song,
in the music. Of Eyes on Me. This is the first time
really?
I'd ever noticed it. I'd never really
didn't.
paid attention to that music because it kind of just sounds like ballroom music.
Yeah.
But there is a little Eyes on Me leitmotif in there, which is kind of like the first meeting of those characters, and that's kind of their theme for the game. So that's the first time you hear that particular theme of romance between those two characters is in the ballroom music itself.
Well, that's fascinating because what it turns into, you'd think, okay, this is going to be this romantic moment and night for him and Renoa, because she walks up to him, she's like, "You're the best looking guy here," And
by the way,
she's clearly, trying to.
That is a meme, right? Have you seen that? You're the best looking guy here, and like you see how fetched up in the original PlayStation version.
And he's all blocky pixel.
I'm going to show you, best looking guy here.
That is
FF8.
funny. FF8.
And if you zoom in on his face, yes, it's so bad, dude.
Oh my gosh! But when
like,
you're into the game, you don't even think about stuff
You're the
like
best
that.
looking guy here.
He's so jacked. That's like the PS1 Hagrid.
Exactly, the PS1 Hagrid meme. But
oh my gosh.
But yeah, so I'm playing the remastered version of it right now, and they've cleaned his face up, and so
he really
he looks way. Here's a good example.
Guy.
So like that's what he looks like now, right?
Okay.
Versus the original.
Oh my gosh, that's funny.
So they fixed it. They fixed it in the remastered version. If you're playing.
Well, good to know. I am not. Actually.
He doesn't. He no longer looks like a freaking deformed mutant. When she says you're the best looking guy here.
That's so funny. And her legs are like 2 pixels thick, by the way. She is so freaking skinny.
That's true of Zell too. Zell was wears the huge baggy pants. Yeah. And his legs
are super skinny.
Like real skinny.
So Renoa, though, she gets distracted by something else, and she leaves, and I don't know if they say this specifically, but I believe she goes to talk to Seifer.
Sid. They do say this later.
She goes to talk to Sid.
She goes to, that's where they form their contract.
Well, that makes sense then. So she goes and talks to Sid. About the timber thing, I guess.
Yeah.
So then Squall's kind of just alone, and you're like, oh, okay, that was kind of anticlimactic, right? Yeah. You thought that it was going to culminate, and it didn't. And but then Quistis shows up, and so you go out and you talk to her a little bit, and she's like, hey,
on the balcony.
I'm getting fired, basically. So she's getting fired.
So before that, because they're on the balcony there.
Oh, you're right. Sorry, it's been
and
that's
she
right.
and she
says,
is basically like this was something I found very convincing. For a 17, 18-year-old girl who clearly has some level of a crush or interest on Squall.
Yeah.
but is his teacher, and it's not. Maybe it's kind of weird, right?
Yeah.
But she comes up to him and she says, "So you'll dance with a total stranger, but you don't even want to spend any time. You can't stand to be around me."
Right.
And he says, "Whatever," right?
As he often does, right? That's his thing.
So
I wonder what that is in Japanese.
Okay, so we should talk about this now.
What
the
he says.
whatevers.
Yeah.
And moving into the fact that she recruits him on a last order as his teacher
to
go into the
training.
training center so that she can vent about being fired from her job.
Which,
but
once again,
so there's a lot to unpack in this about Squall. Squall is a bit of a divisive character. There are some people who really hate him, and I totally understand why, based on how he responds to Quistis during this scene, based on how he treats everybody,
and Renoa and everybody,
At the same time, there are other people who really, really relate to Squall. I won't say that I necessarily fully relate to him, but I relate to him in many ways.
Sure.
To the point where I've never hated Squall because I've understood where he's coming from. Okay, but let's talk about the whatevers real quick.
And do you know what he says in Japanese by chance?
So a couple of different things. So they turned this into Squall's tagline, his recurring
he
thing
says it
that
to
he
Sid.
says
He says it to everybody.
all the time, right?
Yeah.
Oh, this isn't the right one. Hold on. So he has a tag. He has something that he says many times in Japanese, but not as many times.
Warukatta.
Warukatta na.
Warukatta na. That
Warukatta
means, so warukatta means it was bad, and then na means I guess it was bad. That's weird.
Okay,
That's
so
an interesting thing to say.
Warukatta na
Warukatta na.
is the tagline that is repeated.
For whatever. So it's warukatta na. I would not have guessed that.
We have done, back when we did Dark Pixel podcast.
So warukatta means my bad.
Yes.
Yeah.
Kind of. My bad, but, or sorry maybe.
Sure.
But it's apparently a terse.
Doesn't mean
it's
whatever.
a terse way of saying it.
Okay.
So it's not like a genuine
No,
I'm
that's
sorry.
true. Okay, there you go. That makes sense.
It's not like, oh, I'm sorry.
It's informal speech.
It's like, sorry.
That makes sense.
It's informal, it's terse, it's
So
maybe
it's,
a bit sarcastic.
It's hashtag sorry not sorry, right?
Kind of, yes. Kind of.
Okay. Well, that makes a little more sense now. Okay.
So I want to talk a little bit about translation and localization. We did a couple of Dark Pixel podcasts way early back in 2016 when we first started kind of focusing on the gaming channel. And the 2 times this was brought up, this whatever thing was brought up to us. And I just revisited them because I remembered we had talked about it. But Japanese is a very, very different language from English. And translating not just the words, which the syntax is backwards. A lot of time, it's a very context.
They omit
high
the subject.
context language where they omit the subject. Sometimes
the
they'll
time.
omit the verb, where they won't say, but it's just inferred in the conversation, the context of the conversation, what you're talking about, right? So it's a very, very strange language, very different from English, right? So translating it is really hard and requires lots of liberties to try to essentially capture the meaning of what they're talking about while using different words or while adding more words or taking away some or changing it
because
substantially.
a straight translation just wouldn't work. A transliteration
wouldn't work at all.
Would not work at all.
Right?
So you have to do that.
That's one thing that's important to understand. What I think is common, or what I've commonly seen, is that a lot of people who are very into Japanese media, whether they really like anime or they really like manga or they really like JRPGs,
they're hard on the translations. Right?
They are hard on the translations because maybe they started, because they have an interest in it, they started learning a little bit of Japanese.
And they're like, he didn't really say
I
that.
think there's
I've done that before.
I think there's a tendency when you're first learning a language and you start to be able to recognize the differences, to be like, that's not what they said, I know what they really said.
There's a graph that explains that actually. When you first begin learning about something, your degree of confidence in what you're learning spikes really high. But as you become intermediate, as you learn more about it, you realize what you don't know, and then it kind of goes down until you actually become more advanced, and it slowly goes back up. But your confidence level at the beginning is always like the highest.
Yes.
Even though you know the least, technically.
Yeah. That's actually true of almost anything.
That's true of anything, yeah, in school.
When you first start learning something, you get a little bit of proficiency.
Because it feels good
you start
to know
feel,
stuff.
oh, I'm a boss. I know this. I'm good at this.
Yeah, and the more you learn, you're like,
I mean, I was kind of this way a lot with my writing. Maybe like, towards the beginning when I started, doing stuff on YouTube and like my book that I'm writing has like changed so much because I learned how much I really did not know about good storytelling. Back when I thought the book was complete and really solid and really good.
You could publish that first version of your book and then publish this version now. Nobody would know that they're even the same
different stories.
And who knows? Maybe one will do
but
better.
But you're right. It's this process of thinking. Like you gain a little proficiency and think, oh, I've got a handle on this. I know what I'm doing. And to some degree, when we were first doing our filmmaking, I started feeling that way.
Oh yeah.
And then over time,
we criticize these $100 million budget films for doing things wrong. And then at the same time, we're dropping left and right. We're crossing lines. We're doing all sorts of bad things.
Yeah, I was watching some of our Dark Pixel videos, I can't remember why, a few days ago, and going like, dude, that could have been executed so much better.
I know.
But I think when we released it, we were really happy and really proud of it. Thought it was really good. So anyways, my point is that despite the fact that these whatever lines are not necessarily technically accurate to what he's saying in Japanese, I hold to my position that I think this was the first Final Fantasy game in the series that was actually really well localized. Like the translation.
I haven't noticed any weird mistakes yet.
The English flows really well.
There's no this guy are sick.
There's no this guy are sick or grammatical errors or anything like that. And I'm never actually thinking about the text.
Right.
Like I'm just reading it and the story's flowing and I'm just kind of, but I'm not like thinking, oh, that was kind of weird. That was worded not necessarily correctly.
Except for Edea's speech, but we'll get into that.
We'll get into that in a minute, and there actually are some big differences.
Yeah, those are
huge differences between what she says in Japanese.
Yeah.
But anyways, so there's a couple of examples here that I just want to go through real quick and show you the difference. So the first instance of when he says whatever is in the fire cavern, right?
Oh, okay.
And she's basically talking about, ooh, the boys usually get nervous if I come with them, right?
Yeah.
And his answer in English is whatever. But he's thinking it in his mind, right? He didn't say it out loud. But in Japanese...
I like how they did that, actually, with the parentheses.
Yeah.
Although it gets very confusing once you're dreaming. With
I
Laguna.
actually thought it was really well handled because...
Really? Because you're reading Laguna's thoughts and Squall's thoughts at the same time.
We'll get to that in a minute.
You can tell who's who, but at first it was a little rough for me.
It's a complex thing to try and execute.
Yes.
I will say that.
Yeah, they did a pretty good job, though.
Anyways, in Japanese in this scene, he says something more like, I can't believe this teacher, right?
Okay.
Because my teacher is like... essentially like talking about how hot she is and how nervous she makes boys. I can't believe this teacher. This is an example where I actually think whatever might not have been the best choice for the translation.
Sure.
But
maybe like seriously question or something like that would have been a little better.
But
he does say
I still think it works. In particular for a scene that we're not going to get into today, but a scene between Squall and Rinoa at the end. There's a romantic scene together. That I think this whatever tag that they overused, quote unquote, pays off really well in the scene. I think I'm okay with these instances where it's not technically correct. And they decided, because it's still essentially the same sentiment, right?
Right, he's just brushing it off.
He's just saying what the freak?
Yeah, who do you think you are? Like, what is that?
That's the sentiment, and you can express that with the word whatever.
Sure, totally.
And with I can't believe this teacher. Even though the words are different, he's still essentially being like, what the heck is wrong with you? Right?
What the heck is wrong? What's your problem?
That's what he's feeling.
Yeah.
But I've just listed 3-4 different ways that you can express that same feeling. And I think whatever still works, right? Fair enough. So, anyways, the second time comes in this little dialogue when Sid asks Squall about, like, how did it feel to be on the battlefield?
Yes, and I thought it was fascinating because I selected the option where he says whatever.
Oh, you did?
And he said whatever to the headmaster. like this guy is like the principal. He's the teacher's boss. You know.
Yeah.
You always give deference and respect to and he says whatever. Of course, I kind of selected I think the ... option where he says that, but still, it was kind of. I didn't know he was going to say whatever. That wasn't in the option, but he ended up saying whatever. And I was
So
like,
apparently in Japanese, it's more like no big deal or meh.
Yeah.
Which is essentially the same thing as saying whatever.
Mondai.
To me, whatever means like meh or no big deal or
no
whatever.
problem.
No problem, whatever.
Sure.
So I think that works, right? It's fine.
Shikatanai. I could see a lot of these being shikatanai, which technically means like what are you gonna do? What else are you gonna do about it? Like it is what it is.
Oh, I can pull it up and you can see the Japanese there.
Betsuni. Betsuni is another way to say that. Yes. Yeah. Often you'll say betsuni betsu means like separate, I think, but a lot of times you say it to be like no big, right?
Yeah.
No big deal.
Yeah.
That's a good.
So and to me, whatever still works, right?
They'll say betsuni for a lot of different things in Japan, by the way.
Yeah.
Betsuni means it's context sensitive, I guess.
Right.
It means whatever the sentence before it.
And that's why
means.
Japanese is so hard to
I know
translate.
it is. It's true.
Right?
It's true. And
Because
that's
it's
why
such
you
a
can say,
high context.
And then somebody who's just learning Japanese will be like, "Oh, he said betsuni. He didn't say whatever." But it's like, well, hold on. What does betsuni mean in this context?
In context.
It's very different from what the technical dictionary says betsuni would mean. Or betsuni.
Exactly. Okay, so then the third time is on the balcony. We're talking when Quistis comes and talks to him. She's talking about how it's strange that he'll dance with some random stranger, but you can't stand being around me. And his answer is whatever, which was warukatana, which is what became his Japanese tagline. So he says that many times.
Okay,
he just doesn't say warukatana as many times as he says whatever in English.
Yes. Okay. Sure.
But he still says it a lot, right? And so again, that could be like my bad, sorry, or excuse me, or something like that.
Oh, yeah,
but
that makes sense.
it's a terse or sarcastic, informal way of saying it. It's not like a genuine sorry. And so like there are a lot of people who would point out, like, he says sorry, he didn't say whatever, he's not being rude. Like, no, in Japanese, within their culture, what's perceived as rude is a little different from what we perceive as rude in our culture, right? Which could have also been a reason for which could have also been a reason for the change.
Sure.
Warukatana in that context might have been kind of a rude thing to say in Japanese, even though it might technically mean my bad or I'm sorry or something. It's still kind of a rude way of saying it.
Yeah.
And so they kind of just extrapolated that to whatever. Where it's a little more dismissive, a little more sarcastic.
It makes it feel more rude. It makes it feel like, for me, when I was hearing, especially with this scene with her, the later on that we're about to come to, I was like, dude, that's a little over the top, man. Like, I get that you don't care about other people's problems, but like you're being pretty rough here right now.
And then so I'm not going to go through all these, but there's several. We've made the main point. The main point is that
a lot of different things.
He says different things. It's not always whatever. But I actually think that they mostly express a similar sentiment. This dismissal, this not wanting to connect, this wanting to disengage with the thought or just get off my back, leave me alone. I can't believe you, or sorry, but a dismissive, terse. I'm sorry.
Like rolling your eyes.
Everything
here is rolling your eyes.
Yeah, it can all be essentially boiled down to whatever anyways.
Yeah.
It's the same sentiment. So I think that whatever works personally.
What I do too, actually, especially hearing your explanation and seeing this, I agree with you. I'm convinced, because I didn't like it at first either, but when I think about it, a lot of his whatevers are in parentheses, meaning they're his thoughts.
He's thinking
he's
it,
whispering,
not necessarily saying it.
He's not necessarily saying it, and so it's in my mind I'm like, oh, he's saying it, but a lot of times it's just what he's thinking, and that makes a lot more sense because you just kind of think whatever over and over and over. He doesn't say it as often as he thinks it.
Yeah. So on the back of that, when she takes him to the training center, and then she starts unloading.
By the way,
problems.
I love that there's two other couples making out, because at first she's like, oh, there's this special place where the seniors go away to just escape. They don't get caught. It's like a hideout kind of thing, right? And for my initial thought is oh, it's Makeout Point, right?
Yeah.
But when you go there and it's oh, there really are a few other couples here that are privately doing their own thing. Yeah. But it's so Japanese to, even though there's still people there, you still go and have your private moment, because Japan's such a crowded country. It is not common for you to actually go somewhere and be alone. Especially if you're Tokyo.
Around other people, you mean? Or?
Yeah. I mean, you can go to a room or, and that's why they have love hotels and stuff, because it's really, I'm not exaggerating. It is really hard to be alone in Japan unless you have a room or a house or a specific place. But even their apartments and stuff in Japan, it's like 2 rooms. It's a very limited, very small thing, and especially if you live in Tokyo, and that can be quite expensive to have a 2-room apartment in Tokyo. And so I love it's just a little Japanese influence where in America you would have Makeout Point be completely vacant, and you would have them have their special moment here in a place where there's no one else. But because these developers are Japanese and it's subtle, no one even mentions it. They don't even call attention to it. Nobody even mentions that there's other people here.
Oh, there's little people here.
Yeah,
Like,
hey, Quistis, why'd you take me here? There's these, but they didn't even mention it because it's just, and PDA is not normal in Japan.
I was going to ask.
It's not normal in Japan, but it is so hard to be alone. Anywhere. And like when I was in Japan, I went to the top of Tokyo Tower, and they have these fun seats. And I think the whole thing rotates, if I'm not mistaken. I could be wrong about that. But they have these like love seats positioned, facing out, going all around in a circle kind of. And it's always a guy and a girl that are sitting there together because it costs like $100 to go up there.
Yeah.
It's pretty expensive. But it feels kind of weird because it's not private at all. So Japan, they don't do PDA, meaning public display of affection, but they also don't do privacy like at all. Nobody has a sense of privacy very well. That's why they pack into trains and everyone's so close. So I just love that touch. I love that there.
Interesting.
It shows that, because it's so Western. Everything about Final Fantasy is on its face so Western, but there's so much Japanese influence if you just look underneath the surface a little bit.
That's interesting. But so she starts unloading her problems on him, and so I have a little bit of a different reading.
He doesn't even pretend to care.
No,
not even a little.
But to be fair to him, she brought him there on totally false pretenses.
Fair enough.
She didn't give him an opportunity,
and it was a command. He couldn't say no.
She didn't. She didn't give him an opportunity. She didn't ask him, "Hey, would you? There's some things on my mind. Is it okay? Would you be willing to listen to me for a minute? Can we talk?" If she had said that and given him an opportunity to be like, "Sorry, that's not me,"
right?
Like,
then he wouldn't. Yeah,
she dragged him through fighting a bunch of monsters,
a freaking T-Rex,
up to a freaking like romantic spot against his will, kind of. And basically just started venting
because he thought she was still his teacher.
And just started like unloading on him. Yeah. Now, there's a couple of elements to this, and this is where I want to talk about Squall's personality a little bit.
Have you ever had a teacher vent to you, by the way?
No.
Because I haven't.
No.
I know she's young, but still, she's the authority figure.
Yeah.
And she's
it's
like...
a weird relationship.
It is weird. It is weird. Yeah.
So, anyways, his response is very rude. It's to the point of being kind of cruel.
Absolutely. I felt
that. I would not have done that myself.
Good.
Right?
Good to hear.
I don't think it's the right thing to be that harsh in your rejection of a person.
Yeah.
At the same time, I still feel like what she did was not necessarily... I think she was pretty rude in turn. Yeah. Now, maybe not intentionally. Maybe it's just an emotional immaturity on both of their parts. And that's kind of a recurring theme throughout like all of Final Fantasy VIII. But... at the same time, I want to talk about his personality a little bit. And that is to say that I totally get and relate to somebody who comes across to people at first as being kind of an a-hole, and people don't like you very much at first, right? But then when you're finally able to kind of break through the barrier that they put up, you see a bit of a different side to them, and you see why they're so guarded or protective of that, right? There's usually a reason for it.
He has real problems.
Yes.
Right? But it's funny because people unload their problems on him, and it's like, oh, take care of yourself, But at the same time, it's like, I think a more accurate answer that he just doesn't realize himself is that, hey, I have huge problems too, but I don't want to talk about them.
What he says is, I don't want people's burdens, and you need to figure this out yourself.
Don't put it on me.
What is really happening is I am not emotional. I'm so volatile in here. On the face, it looks like I'm real cool and composed, but what's going on in here is so violently.
Don't add to it.
Freaking tempestuous, or
what's funny?
Like tempestuous is the word I was looking for. That if we break in there, I'm gonna freak out. I can't handle what you're trying to give to me. That's what's really happening with Squall.
But he can't. He doesn't do words.
He can't voice that.
Yeah.
And he's trying so hard to guard this
What's funny?
volatility inside.
That is so similar to Seifer. Like when you look at the two of them at the beginning, like they couldn't be more different, right? They're not the same kind of person. But as you learn more about them and see their inner workings and the issues that they face and how they are so emotional yet closed off emotionally in a lot of ways, Squall doesn't necessarily act out the way Seifer does, but inside they're very, very similar.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's like, I think there's an episode of Cowboy Bebop I watched once where Spike, he finds somebody and everyone says, oh, you guys are so similar, but they hate each other.
Yeah.
They absolutely hate each other. And they hate that people keep telling them that they're alike in any way. And they are trying to kill each other by the end of the episode. But I see that with Squall and Seifer here, where it's like they really are alike, but my gosh, don't tell them that.
The difference is that Seifer is not afraid to express what he's feeling. Right? Like he will act. He has a little bit more, I guess, confidence. Maybe it's a bit of a faux confidence, or maybe like a naive confidence.
Definitely.
But more confidence to express or act on the things he's feeling.
Yeah.
And Squall is essentially trying to repress everything he's feeling. And
repress is a good word.
And
that's Squall.
Just totally bury it.
Yep.
Right? Because and I relate to that on a deep level. Like that's what I've done my whole life. And what it results in is a lot of really bad first impressions where people think you're really mean. They think that they think that like you're a jerk. They think they don't like you.
Or that you just don't care.
Or that you don't care about anything.
And in some ways it may be true you don't care about the people you meet immediately, but it's like, well, but everyone needs a chance to like get to know people better or whatever.
And this is going to be the arc of Squall's character, right?
Yeah.
He's going to learn to become more vulnerable, and Renoa is going to be a big part of that over the course of the
She's
story.
going to force him out of his shell.
But at the beginning of it, I can understand why a lot of people are like, I hate this main character.
Right.
He's really, he's a jerk. I don't like this guy.
Right.
Because a lot of people felt that way about me in my lifetime.
Well, that's interesting. That's interesting.
And I don't blame them for that.
Oh, sure. Well, there you go.
And I don't blame people for not liking Squall.
Well, there you go.
But just keep in mind, if it's a first-time playthrough, he's not going to stay this way all the way through.
Sure.
And they balance him with a second pseudo-main character who is an extremely likable...
Yes. And an open book.
Yeah.
And very,
with Laguna, which we'll get into in a little bit later. Laguna's role was actually supposed to be much bigger than it ended up being.
But after my first playthrough of the game, or after my first just experience with Laguna, when they kind of pass out, I was like, I want to play as him as a main character. He seems like a fun kind of guy. Like that would be fascinating.
Yeah.
So they they have a good time. Not
so
really.
when they
Also,
come out of
by the
that-
way, it's after midnight. In fact, Quistis is like, what time is it? He's like, it's past midnight. Think about what happened that day. That was a long day for him. That was a long day. And here's this teacher who wants to like be a burden on him even more. They don't talk about that at all, but I could see that being a little more realistic as well. Like he is ready for bed. Let this guy get some sleep.
Exactly.
Okay. So they come back, fight a T-Rex, and Renoa is there.
Well, no, it's not Renoa. It's a girl we don't know the name of yet.
Oh dear. Oh, sorry. She's wearing the blue dress.
Yes. Girl we don't know the name of yet.
But it's the girl from the very, very, very beginning who walks in and says, "Oh, like
Squall, we meet again."
Yeah, we meet again, and then she leaves.
Kind of.
Okay. And then she's got like handlers. She's got like security around her.
Right.
But yeah, it's not Renoa. It's somebody else who also happens to have brown hair and be wearing a blue dress.
Blue dress.
But yes,
this is the third major mystery that they've set up for the story. Is this girl? They've called attention to it, I think, 4 times at this point with this scene. Now, here's something that is a really good, subtle piece of foreshadowing. They hear a girl in trouble.
Yeah.
Quistis says, "Oh my gosh, what's happening? Let's run over there." The girl says, "Squall, Quisti."
Yes, she said Quisti.
She calls to Quistis as Quisti, as if she knows her, right?
Yeah, Quisti.
Like a what do you call that? A pet name or like a nickname?
A nickname,
kind of a thing,
yeah, something like that.
Quisti, help!
Yes, and then after she leaves, after they fight the bad guy, Quistis says, Squall says, "Who was that?" And Quistis is like, "I never met her
who is that? I don't know who that is."
So it's like, well,
So,
wait, but she knew who you
Squall
were.
and Quistis have no idea who this girl is, and she clearly seems to know who they are, right? And, well, we know that she knows who Squall is because she calls out to him by name in the infirmary in the very beginning, and now she's calling to Quistis by this nickname.
Yeah,
So,
which means they were close. It doesn't just mean she knows her. It means that they were close.
Exactly. Yeah. So, third major mystery is, who is this girl that keeps popping up, and how does she know our characters, and why don't they know her? So now, the reason I'm pointing out these things is what we're going to do as we go through, because I think the setups for these 5 mysteries we'll get to by the end of today's episode, I think they're all set up fairly well. Again, I feel like the radio interference could have been better.
That one.
And there's another one that I think is really hidden that we'll get into in a minute.
Okay.
They're real hidden in the bread crumbs are left on the periphery of the plot and not in the plot, so they're easy to miss. But the 5 mysteries that are set up, we're going to pay attention to how they're paid off later in the second and third act of the game. Sweet. But this is another big one. So
yeah, and there's really not much more to say about her. I just don't know. We don't know who she
right
is
now
yet.
we don't know too much. Okay, so 2 more things before we get out of Balamb and start moving into the main story here. First of all, the way that you get money in this game, it's like a salary, rather than like in
and
traditional.
it's based on your performance in some way, right?
Yeah, so you have a seed rank.
Yeah.
So they judge your performance based on what you did in the Fire Cavern and in the Dalit mission, and they'll assign you a seed rank. And depending on that seed rank, you get paid a salary. You can increase that seed rank by taking tests in the menu. So you go into the menu, go down to the tutorial, and then there's like a test section. You can take all these seed exams, and if you pass them, you increase your salary, right? Another thing that I don't know if they call it out directly, or if you kind of have to find that. But that's how you make money in the game. And it's a little different. Usually in RPGs, you defeat a monster, you get money by fighting.
Yeah.
So there's a quote here from Kitase about this that I wanted to read. So he says, up until then, all RPGs had pretty much been defeat the monster, you get some money, you get some experience points, and you level up. And it was just a continuation over and over again. Within those letters and opinions we saw about Final Fantasy VII, there were a number of people saying, isn't it time for something new? We'd like a new system. For example, up until then, if you defeated a monster, you got money, but in Final Fantasy VIII, we decided to give players salaries, so after a certain period of time passes, they get money. There was definitely some people who weren't happy with that because it wasn't what they expected or weren't prepared for it to be, but equally, I thought it would present a new appeal for people. So I liked the idea and concept. I think it works within the whole like seed, like you working for seed.
Because whatever you're doing at any given time is typically a mission that you are sent on.
Yeah.
And
so they'd be
you are an employee and you get salaried.
Whether that's weekly or monthly.
And the mission you're sent on, they're paying for you to be there. So it all kind of, it's a business.
So I like it. The thing about money in this game is that it almost never comes into play though. Like in most Final Fantasies or most RPGs, you're going from town to town buying new equipment.
Every new town you get something
buying new magic spells, buying new whatever, buying items.
Right.
The only time in all of Disc 1 that I spent any money at a shop was to buy tents so that I could refine them into Kiraga spells.
Oh, nice.
Not because I was going to use the tents.
Right.
So while the idea is fine, just you don't really need money for much in the game at all anyways. You use it to buy train tickets, which are required anyways
it's
to like move on with the story.
Yeah.
But like, I don't know. This is a thing I don't really have like much of a strong opinion on because money isn't that important in the game.
And do you feel like you lost much by money not being I don't either.
Not really.
I don't either. Because typically you go to a new place and in like Final Fantasy 9 or something, or 7, we'll say 7.
Yeah.
You go to a new place, you buy the new sword, you buy the new items, you just re-equip everyone. It's just kind of, it just takes time. And then, but the enemies are more difficult. So even though your stuff's better, still takes the same amount of time for every battle, basically, right? So it doesn't really make that big a difference. And the way this game did it, I didn't really miss it, so I think it was fine.
And if you take the seed exams, you're getting like freaking tons of money, like all the time. So you're never going to be hurting for money. Because it's like, I don't know if it's based on how many steps you take or if it's based on just on a passing of time. But like there's a certain amount of time passes.
It's just random.
Bam, you get a salary.
Yeah.
And if you've taken all the seed exams you can up to level 12 or 15 or whatever you are at the time, you're getting like 20,000 gil every single time this happens. So it's just like bam, bam, bam. That adds up pretty quick. And I've never in any of my playthroughs of this game encountered a time where it's like, oh, I don't have enough money.
Right.
I always have enough money.
Because if you do not have enough money, what do? You just have to wait.
Yeah.
So they kind of avoided that whole situation.
Exactly.
Which is fair enough. So you go back, and the next morning you wake up, and the timber mission has showed up, and
new
you're
mission.
already being sent on your
first mission.
First mission the day after becoming a seed, and it's in Timber, and they don't really explain too much right off the bat, other than Timber is full of resistance people. It's like a town of people who just resist the government all the time.
Because Timber was invaded by Galbadia.
Yes.
After the 17 years ago Sorceress War thing ended,
Yeah.
where Esthar went quiet and the radio interference began, that's when this new president, Vinzer Delling, came into power, and one of the things he did was occupy Timber.
Yeah.
And
they consider him more of a dictator than a president, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So they all try to resist him all the time, and because of that, he kind of has gotten wise to a lot of their schemes. Anytime there's news, or sometimes he will purposefully seed out in false information, because these resistance people are always going to try and attack him.
One thing I want to mention before leaving Balamb, if you have Selfie in your party, so when you go out to the front gate, and Sid tells you
and Zell comes up on a skateboard.
And they confiscate
gets it taken away.
So when you get Selfie in the party, if you go back inside and you go up to the student desks, the computers that they have at the desks,
I didn't do that yet.
She has a diary in there that you can read. And there's a couple of very important pieces of foreshadowing.
Really?
that
you don't say.
That really change how a big plot twist later in the game will land.
Really?
I guess it might have been a spoiler to say that. I'll consider cutting that part of it out. But okay, so
we'll see.
What the student terminal says, if you go into the basics menu, and then go into the school festival committee, which is her little menu, and you go into Selfie's diary, she writes, in the basics menu, so not in her diary, but in the basics menu, it says a GF is an independent energy source. By combining it with paramagic, it is possible to control tremendous energy. Memory loss is a possible side effect, but this has not been proven as of yet. And then you go into her diary. Obviously, she would have read that.
I
right?
do remember reading that on my first playthrough, but it wasn't in Disc 1.
Oh,
it
right.
was later, when I went back there later.
Right. So then you go into her diary. She, being a seed student, would have read that in the basics in their computer terminals. She said, I've been assigned on my first mission. I'm not sure where we're to be sent. Even if I knew, I wouldn't tell you. But once the mission's done, we're free to talk about what we want. So just wait, okay? I hope someone's reading this. Well, wish me luck. I'll be back very soon. Worry number 1, side effects of GF. I've been studying up on the GF because, I'll be using more of it now, and now that I'm a seed. Am I going to lose my memories?
Wow. She just basically says it straight up.
So since it's there, I think it's not a spoiler.
You can do it on Disc 1, sure.
You can do it on Disc 1. It's important. It's hugely important to have a setup to this.
Yeah.
There is speculation in the world that using GFs will cause memory loss. That is one of the major criticisms of using GFs. It is even mentioned that the other gardens, only Balamb Garden is actually experimenting with GF
the other
use.
ones don't use it.
You go to Galbadia Garden later, they don't use GFs there. There's a lot of criticism surrounding using GFs. And the garden faculty, who you go and talk to right after graduation,
that's
is like,
fascinating.
Please ignore any criticism about GFs.
Yes.
just ignore all that.
From
just
anyone.
pretend it doesn't exist.
Yeah, and it's funny.
But one of the major things is using GFs will cause you to lose your memories, allegedly. Okay, back into the Timber mission.
So we buy our ticket, we go off to Timber, we get into the train, and the things that happen on the train are kind of funny. So you go into this room, and Zell calls it the seed room. I don't know if it's always just for seeds or if it's
on the train with the people.
On just the big train with everybody. It's just their suite.
Oh,
their room,
the suite in their room. Yeah.
He calls it the Seed Suite or something. I don't know if he just called it that because they were on it, or if it's normally called that.
Designated for seed.
Because he says something else later on.
I think he says it pays to be a seed. Like,
oh, exactly.
Yeah.
And but also even after that though, he says, after the thing happens, the dream, he says, "Wow, what do you think happened? I don't know, but people don't like seeds very much," or something like that.
Yeah.
They knew he was there.
Because he was saying maybe someone used sleeping gas on us or something.
Yes, because they don't like us.
Right, because people don't like
Okay,
seeds.
so they get in there, and it's this huge suite, but what ends up happening is they all end up passing out and having this crazy dream, where it's like a DMT drug trip, because they're all seeing the same thing, and they're all.
You know what I really liked?
Whole new batch of characters.
What I really liked right before that happened. It's just a little nice character moment for Zell. He's basically explaining to Squall something about timber, and
oh yeah, and Squall calls him a know-it-all.
Hey,
right?
don't you know this and Galbadia took over, and he's like
17 years, and
he was leading into like making a point about it. It seemed, and then Squall's like, okay, so what about it? It's like, oh no, that's it. And then Squall's like, thanks, Mr. Know-It-All Zell. And his response is, hey, man, no problem.
I love that, dude. I thought that was... Zell is great. I love Zell.
Love the characters in the game. I'm sorry. Yeah. There are so many people who just can't stand these characters, and to the end of my life, I will never understand why. It's because they have a great chemistry, I think.
I think so, together.
I think that they play off of each other. The characters that they surround Squall with in his immediate party balance his cold, calculated, callous, coarse, like jerk personality with these really likable, fun personalities. I loved moments like that, and the animations they give to Zell and Selfie too, like when they're waiting,
and he's
they're waiting
like,
to,
or he's like,
they're waiting to know whether they're going to pass seed or not, and you see Zell kind of walking back and forth, and just like, and then as soon as he gets caught, and he's just like marching, like, and they're like, yay, we passed.
And he always does. His fist
I like them. I like the animations.
Too.
I like the character that they give to them.
They act their age. I will say that.
Yeah, for sure.
They act their age, which is more or less, believable. I knew people liked Dell at school.
And then they contrast our party acting their age with a new party in the dream sequence that follows. They all fall into a dream. They all sudden like, oh, what's wrong?
When I first played this game, I had no idea what was going on. And I had no idea how long that sequence was going to take. Yeah. And I had no idea if we were ever going to see our main character Squall ever again.
Yep.
So you drop into this sequence. The only thing that gave me the hint that we were going to see Squall again was that you can read Squall's thoughts as this new sequence is going along. So we got 3 brand new characters: Laguna and Kiros,
Ward, and
Ward. And so anyways, they're soldiers. They're Galbadian soldiers. And Laguna's their leader, which is hilarious because they both kind of talk to him as though he just never knows what's going on. He doesn't know where they are. He has the worst sense of direction in the world. He forgets things. He's just not fit to be a leader.
Yeah.
In terms, it's not due to anything that's his fault. It's just how he is. He is not a leader kind of person. But for some reason, he's the leader of this group, and they both know that he's not fit to be their leader. So they're always making these snide remarks, and he comes up with the funniest little one-liners where he'll be like, "What did he say?" I think it's in the second dream. He says, "Nothing's free. Nothing's cheaper than free.
Nothing's cheaper than free," and they're all like,
"Nothing cheaper." ...
than free.
And he's like, "What?" Like he has no idea that these witty one-liners he comes up with are just not actually saying anything. Anything important. So
Laguna's great. I think is my favorite character in the game.
I love Laguna, especially because of so they're on this mission and they're kind of going through this, I think it's like a foresty area, and they're just completely lost, and they don't do anything. They fight a bunch of low-level grunt monsters, and the Kiros keeps bringing up, like, hey, aren't we supposed to be, like, doing something over here? And eventually they just decide to leave. They're just like, we're done. Let's go home. That's basically how it goes, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and so they're like, okay, so they find their way to the car. They're like, oh, here's the car. Yes, we got it. Okay, let's go home and have a drink.
Yeah.
And so they drive back to their hometown.
And I especially love when they get there, he just parks in the middle of the road, and he creates this huge traffic jam. And like you go into the hotel even, right?
It's not that close. You have to walk away.
You run into the hotel, and when you first enter, the street by the hotel is clear.
Yeah.
But if you come back out after entering, the whole freaking road is backed up. So which is indicating that where they parked back here backed the whole city up because
a
the
nice
city
touch. That's
is
fun.
essentially like you can drive around it.
Yeah.
Like when you get on the buses later, right?
Yes,
It's
yeah,
essentially
the
a
bus.
circuit. Like it's designed like a circuit.
Which is how Japan.
So the idea is that his car parked in the middle of the road on this other screen back
stopped
here
the whole
backed
thing.
traffic in the entire circuit all the way around.
That is funny, dude. I love that.
It's so funny. It's a really, really great touch of
His
humor.
character, he's really silly, and that's a whole, huge theme of Final Fantasy VIII. There's just a lot of silly characters, but they have really good hearts. They're really good people. They're strong people with complex backgrounds, but they are silly and in ways that normal people are, right? You know, you just think your average person, you know, your average like 95 IQ, just like person out there, just living their life, you know. And it's like this is kind of what it is, you know. They're just normal dudes. They go out for a drink, you know. They're slacking at their job. They're just trying to live life and get through. And so he goes to this hotel, and they all know it, but he pretends like, oh, I need a drink, man. You guys want a drink? And they're like, dude, we know why you want to go there. It's not for the drinks. There's this hot girl. What's her name? I can't remember. Her name.
It's why did I
Julia.
forget?
Julie.
It's Julia.
Julie. And he just basically wants to go there to just stare at her. That's like all he does. And he'll order drinks or whatever. They always say the usual, which means they come here all the time, right? And it's hinted later on that they're just always there. And so the guys are like, come on, dude, go talk to her. And so he gets up, and he just can't. He's such a wuss. He can't talk to her.
I love that. I love
his leg cramps
the
up.
cramping, the leg cramping, like, oh. And I
And
especially
he's
love
walking in a circle. He walks back right in front of her again, still limping.
Yep.
And he
and what I especially love is that when he goes back down again, because like, oh, I chickened out, and then Ward and Kira, they see her coming, and they're like, hey man, we're taking off. You know, drinks are on us. Just stay a while.
Stay as long
and
as
then
you want.
And he's turned facing them, and then she comes in behind him. He turns around and goes, oh, and he starts cramping his leg again.
I didn't catch
He
that.
starts kind of like limping away.
I didn't realize that's what was happening. Oh, that's so funny.
And
That's so funny.
oh, it's a great touch.
He just can't handle it. Like he wants certain things, but he's not built for that. You know. So she has to make all the moves, right? He won't do anything. He won't take a single risk with her.
Yeah.
He won't invite her. He won't. You know, even when he does later on, he talks about he's like, hey, we should go get a drink together sometime. It's like, you're together right now. Why are you doing this?
It's like he has no idea what to do.
He doesn't.
Like
He's lost
he's talking about Kiris and Ward,
love
and we're
him,
buddies,
by the
and we
way.
go
He's so
drinking.
good.
You should come with us.
Yeah.
Like my buddies and I to go drink. You're like essentially on a first date with a girl, inviting her to come drink with your
You're
buddies.
in a room alone with her.
He has no idea what he's doing, but he's so true to himself.
He is.
And once he gets rolling and he like loosens up, he's just an open book, and he's so opposite of Squall. And this is
really likes
something
that. She finds it very charming.
the developers talked about. Let's see if I can pull up the interview here. Not this one. I keep pulling up this one.
This is why, though. I want a game of just Laguna and them. Like, I want them to just like have their own game.
That is what Nojima, Kazuhiko Nojima, the scenario writer, he said if they ever did more Final Fantasy VIII games, he would want to do a Laguna story.
Like
right? And this is actually something
I'd love it.
that I wish they had done in Final Fantasy X with Jekt and Braska and you know all that story of the parents of
the parents,
Yuna and
Tidus, that's it. Yeah,
Tidus and Yuna's fathers went
parents.
on a pilgrimage before them, right? And so you see that in flashbacks in Final Fantasy X. I wish that they had done it kind of like in
where
FF8,
you could actually
where you played it
be
a little
part
bit.
of it.
That would have been really cool.
Yeah.
And it was actually the intention to make essentially balance the game half and half. Half the game is Squall and company, half the game is Laguna and
That would have been crazy. I'd have loved it, but because I love Laguna, more Laguna is not a bad thing.
Yeah.
But that would have been rough on the general, like what story are you trying to tell here kind of thing. It was complicated enough having one main character.
They didn't have enough time to execute it.
Okay.
And they had to end
That
up
might
cutting,
be for the best.
They had to end up cutting a lot of Laguna content.
Really?
And they actually had developed a world map for like the Laguna
So you could go
storyline.
to...
And Nojima talks about it, where he's like, he felt embarrassed that they essentially had a lot of their team
work.
develop all this work that they just like cut out. But he says, as for Squall and Laguna, the basic idea was that we wanted Laguna's character to do things that Squall was unable to. In the beginning, when I talked with Nomura, we decided Squall's character was aloof and unsociable, and he doesn't like to talk to people. And I thought, okay, cool, but that might be a problem for the story.
Yes.
But I figured, no matter how aloof he may be, he's still ultimately a 17-year-old, and that youthful spirit would finally win out. So he starts out distant, but gradually becomes more open as the story goes on. But they wanted to balance that out with these Laguna sections, these sequences with Laguna. And I think it actually does a really good job. It gives you a break
once you
from
realize
Squall,
what's going on. Yeah.
And they're all very charming, these little storylines with Laguna. It's some of my favorite parts of the game was when his come around.
When he throws those two guys off the cliff and then he goes, wow, you guys got guts. I would never show.
That was my favorite.
I was laughing so hard.
He picks them up and literally throws them off the cliff.
Both of them.
And then he looks over, dang, you guys got guts. You see how high this cliff is?
You see how high? And they're wounded, so they couldn't do anything. He just threw them off. Oh, it's so good. And then
I will say this.
He slowly slips off the cliff because he can't do it.
I will say this about Yoshinori Kitase. I have criticized the man to high hell and back, or whatever the saying is. I do not like a lot of his storytelling sensibilities, but he is great with humor. This is one thing that he added to Final Fantasy's identity that Sakaguchi was not really very strong at before.
Sure, that makes sense.
Because if you look back to Final Fantasy IV and the games before that, they didn't have tons of humor.
Like hardly at all.
They were pretty straightforward. Now, on the NES games, there's just a limitation on text generally, so there's not a lot that you can do. But
I think 5 was where
with Final Fantasy V, which is where Kitase entered.
There you go.
His first time being a scenario writer. This is when they started to incorporate this really nice sense of humor. I think that he's very good at that. And this game is really great with it, in my opinion. It's really funny. It's genuinely a very funny
I like
game.
because instead of putting some of these qualities onto Squall and having him be funny sometimes, they just separate it up, but in a way that you never know when it's going to happen. All of a sudden, you're playing as Laguna now. And because Squall passed out. And you get to have the humor kind of pace throughout the game without having to compromise Squall's character that much for who he is. And anyways, I absolutely love it. Yeah. So the parts with Laguna are funny. So this girl talks to him, and I thought something was going to happen. Nothing happened because he falls asleep.
Let's real quickly talk about the text boxes we were talking about, whether it's whose thoughts. Who are we reading here?
Every now and then there's and it's Squall, and I think it's like a darker shade of gray or something.
Yeah,
when
so
it's Squall.
they use a couple. This is a very complex thing to try to pull off when you have no voice acting.
Well, because you're reading Laguna's thoughts.
Yes.
So Laguna talks, then Laguna thinks, then Squall thinks.
And even Selfie and Zell.
Yes, they'll come in
adding
too.
commentary
and you can tell when it's them. That was
because
well done.
I think Selfie is the one who says, "Ooh, I think Laguna's kind of cute."
Yeah, he's kind of cute. Yeah,
right?
And I'm like, Squall didn't say that.
Right, and so it's kind of a complex scene. You have the thoughts of 3 characters who are not there.
Yeah.
You have the thoughts of Laguna, and then you have the text of Laguna, and the way that they separate it. I thought it worked. So essentially they use
worked after a
opaque text boxes versus transparent text boxes.
Yes,
so that's one tactic. And then they use white text.
And then
or
gray.
White text inside of parentheses.
Yes, that's Laguna thinking.
Or gray text.
And gray text, if they're going that way, that's when you know it's
That's
not.
when you know it's Squall or Zell
outside,
or Selfie commenting on the dream that they're watching. But I think that it's pretty effective. I mean, I could see, what's going on here? But, because, I don't know, I don't really have, there's not a reference to anything else where they do that. I can't think of a book where they separate a person's thoughts from their...
It's like Inception.
Usually...
Every layer deep you go into, it's like it gets
usually
more and more
in
difficult.
Books, they'll italicize
they'll
thoughts.
italicize things.
And then put quotations when they're speaking dialogue.
And easy enough, you just say he thought, he said, or it's a little
and
easier
you can
to call attention.
you can do the tags to insert to clarify who's talking.
But italics is common,
But in here they're using parentheses. So anytime it's in parentheses, it's a person's thoughts.
I wonder if they couldn't. Oh, you know what? Japanese and italics are not friends. That would be why.
That's probably
Japanese italics, I can't even think of how you would do kanji in italics. That would ruin the whole language. So I think that they didn't do italics in Japanese. I guess they could have when they translated it to English, but they probably. What do you think the character count would have been similar? And so
I
they had to fit
don't know.
into the same boxes. I know the NES was like that. You had to fit the same.
It was a
number
huge
of
problem.
characters.
Ted Woolsey talks about this in one of his interviews.
Yeah.
A huge problem with translations was that the English text was so many more characters and so much longer
Yeah.
than the Japanese.
A word
that
in Japanese
it
can be
wouldn't
2.
fit.
In English, it's like
And
5.
so they
yeah.
would make, like, he wrote an entire Final Fantasy VI translation that he had to can the entire thing and start over
because
from
he
scratch.
read it before
because
he wrote it before they programmed
he
it?
thought he was being really,
Yeah.
he thought he was being really, like, brief.
Yeah.
And he thought he did a good job at being succinct.
Yeah.
But it was still basically twice as much dialogue as he was allowed to write.
That makes sense.
And so he had to start over again from scratch and do the whole thing again. And so it's just really hard to judge these translators when they were doing this in a month's time and trying to translate like thousands of pages of text.
Yeah.
And they would do the whole project and then realize, oh, I'm double over my
that's
limit.
unfortunate because you want to be able to translate it and then code it into the text, but it's almost like you have to do it simultaneously.
Mm-hmm.
Like however long this was, you have to fit this into that same box, which means you have to be in the code to see where your limits are, basically. That sucks because that ruins workflow. That would take a lot longer
Especially
to
in
do
these
it that
games
way.
where there's no voice acting, it's just text. And the text has to be really abbreviated to fit.
So I would say that might have something to do with why they didn't do other italic things. But either way, what they ended up doing worked.
But I do
after
really-
a while. It just took a few text boxes for me to realize,
Yeah.
to realize what
what
was
this
going on.
is.
But from that point on, it was fine.
Yeah. And Kazushika Nojima also talks about the reasons why he kind of wanted to do this, where he wanted to do more of like showing you what the character's thinking. This isn't something they had done before in Final Fantasy.
Not to my
You
knowledge.
didn't
They
really
never
have
said
characters.
Yeah, what they were thinking.
They did not show
Yeah.
what they said in their mind.
I think you had to do that with Squall, though, because he's such a closed-off
Exactly.
character. You
That's
don't
exactly
want
right.
a silent protagonist for Final Fantasy.
It was one thing that he felt that he had received criticism about
Yeah.
with Final Fantasy VII was that he didn't feel like people understood Cloud well enough.
Fair enough, yeah.
And he was like, well, one way that I feel like I can address that is to get you into
Hear his
Squall's thoughts so that you can know what he's thinking
Mm-hmm.
and not just what he says, and maybe that will clarify a little bit and make it a little easier. But he says here, Final Fantasy VII was a huge success outside of Japan, so right from the start with Final Fantasy VIII's development, one of our main objectives was making something that would be popular overseas. We didn't have this in mind at all when making FF7, so I changed my way of writing. For example, in Japanese, you can make a character speak without revealing their gender. You can use that and make a reveal later about how that character was actually a woman. This isn't possible in English, as the translation will always either be he or she. Another
Unless you say
example,
it.
another example
Or
would
they, I
be
guess.
jokes. Until then, I only thought about Japanese players, so puns were not a problem. But I heard the translators had a lot of trouble with that when they were translating Final Fantasy VII. So we tried our best to write FF8 scenario in a way that would be easier to translate. So that, I think, leads to why I feel like FF8 was the first game that read in English much more smoothly.
They actually made a point to that. Okay, nice.
But he also said something here about the text boxes and the thoughts, and I thought I had pulled it up. Oh, this is where he says at first the Laguna's part was much bigger. They were making about half of FF8, basically Laguna-centric. But as development went on, they got shorter and shorter. The staff worked really hard to make a map for Laguna's parts, but in the end it's barely used in the final game. I felt bad about that and couldn't apologize enough to the staff. Anyways, I don't want to spend too much time on it. We've been going for quite a while now. But anyways, this was one of the things he wanted to do, was get into the character's head with their thoughts. So
And you
I
need
think
to,
it's
'cause
effective.
This particular game wouldn't work unless you were in the character's heads.
Absolutely.
So that makes perfect sense. So Laguna's with Julie. He passes out. They don't. Nothing happens like romantically. She just thinks that he's like cute, and he just makes a fool of himself over and over and over. So he wakes up, and you find out maybe a little later why she kind of wanted to talk to him, but that's probably not till disc 2. So at the moment, she just says things like, "Hey, you were always smiling when I played piano, and I don't always want to just play piano. I want to sing too, and you help me kind of. You're a source of inspiration for me because you're always there and you're always smiling at me." And so it's like, okay, cool. So she's going to be a singer now. And we'll find out more about that later, how that all goes. So the guys wake up and they're just like, what in the world was that? But every time, this happens twice in Disc 1 where they fall into the Laguna thing, each time they're like, there's no time to think about it now. Let's just keep going.
And how could
Isn't that interesting?
How could you explain it?
I don't know how to explain it, but I wouldn't be able to help myself from
Thinking
talking about it.
What on earth was that?
Yeah, being like, no, and everyone's just like, oh, hey, we'll deal with that later. I'll be like, no, what just happened, you guys? Like, this is insane. Wait, did you really see what I saw? Like, it would be this thing. But the idea being they all had the same dream together. They were all seeing the exact same thing. And so they find out later, like, wait, there's a Laguna in your dream too? Oh, yeah, and then there were these other people.
And so now
it's crazy, but they don't know why it happened. They don't know anything.
Yeah, so now we've had the 4th and the 5th mystery setups, which is GFs and memory loss potentially.
Right.
And what on earth are these dream sequences?
Yeah, what's going on here?
Why were we all sharing this dream and seeing this Laguna guy, and why is it important? Why are we seeing him more than once? Why does this keep happening?
So they think someone's gassed their room. They come up with a few theories, but ultimately they decide, let's just not talk about it. Let's leave. Which to me is weird, but I get why they did it, because they weren't going to get anywhere, even if they did talk about it. So it's like, fine, that's weird, but I get it. We'll go with it. So they hit up Timber and they meet with the Resistance, and it turns out Renoa is from Timber, and she's part of the Resistance. And they're like, oh wow, good to meet you here. And so she, they call her Princess. She's the princess.
Yeah, she's the princess.
You don't know why, though, but she's the princess. Okay, whatever. You don't really question it at first. And they're trying to kidnap the president. That's their whole
President of Galbadia. Yeah.
Now, this is where we get to. We were talking for a minute before the podcast about how Disc 1 contains, well, this particular section we just played contains my favorite parts of the game, which are things like with Laguna and all that, and my absolute least favorite parts of Final Fantasy VIII. And we're not talking favorite, like this, don't like this, because that's not what this podcast is about. But I do have to point out that these characters are very immature.
Yeah.
Like incredibly immature to a degree that you never saw in these Final Fantasy games before. And it makes it kind of difficult for me because they're like kidnapping the president of the country. And they're like, we literally just came up with this plan, like right now. You guys just barely got here. Here's the plan. Okay, let's go. We're doing it right now. Like literally right now.
We're turning
All
around.
Right, let's go kidnap the president. Yeah. And it's like, whoa, guys, a plan like this takes months, years. You don't just...
It's a very elaborate
And it is an elaborate plan, because they got all these codes. They're gonna like unlink a train and then relink and then link the train back up. It's crazy, right?
Yeah.
And then they built a literal replica of the president's train and a robot that like acts like the president. It's wild that they did all this, but as soon as Seed gets here, it's like, we're in a rush, let's go right now.
There's a very, very interesting contrast, and it's something that I need to think more about
exactly
how intentional it is or not.
Yes.
But between the unbelievable emotional maturity of these characters, and the high level of competence to accomplish the missions that they do, because these forest owls, the way they act. The way they plop on the floor. Squall comments on this.
They just squat down.
You just squat down on the floor.
Which is another
right
Japanese thing, by the way.
How do you think we feel working for this kind of organization?
Yeah, he's like, you guys, our lives are in your hands, and you're just like,
you think this is a game.
Let's do this. Let's try this.
Yeah, so he's commenting on how completely naive and just like emotionally immature they are.
And I can't agree with him more.
But the plan that they pull off takes unbelievable competence to pull off.
Yeah, and you have like a small window, like a 5-minute window to like perform this whole thing.
So they're very capable, and especially the Seed members, trained to do highly difficult,
sophisticated, complicated
missions.
Yeah.
But they are 17-year-olds, and they act like it.
And you have to keep reminding yourself, these are kids. These are teenagers. These are not adults. Because it's so easy when you're playing the game, you're fighting monsters, you're using guns and swords, and you're killing things, to kind of forget that these are young people. And it's because we don't have that in our world. Like what we mentioned earlier, Selfie being a special...
It just doesn't make... I'm not convinced by that at all.
She's a freaking Green Beret, apparently.
She should have been some person in Timber who's maybe a member of a resistance or something.
Exactly. Some skills, but not like this elite.
Not an elite trained
a Navy SEAL.
member of Seed who passed. she just doesn't.
Yeah,
it just
doesn't
make
work.
sense to me.
But just it's a different world. Whatever. These are just kids. But you like to your point, they have the skills. They do have the skills. You can't deny that. That's why it's so easy to look at them as not just being kids. But they are just kids, and it's moments like these that remind you these are just kids. They squat down on the floor. They have the little model trains. I love how they all took turns making fun of her crappy model trains.
And they actually pile on a bit more after that because you can go to the hotel in Timber and there's a model train inside of there and there's a girl looking at it and you go talk to her and she's like, oh, this model train is very sophisticated. It's very cool looking. and you get an option, a dialogue box option, and you can choose to say it's a lot better than Renoa's.
I love that.
And then she's like, oh, you're so mean. And he's like, I'm just kidding. She's like, yeah, but every time you're kidding, it's like a half truth. And so like they pile on Selfie, Zell, Squall, just how ugly this car is that she made it.
And you know what's funny? Because you read Squall's thoughts too.
Yeah.
And so he's not even saying half of what he's thinking.
Yeah.
But like, is it Zell or Zone or somebody brings up like, wow, that's a really bad model car. And Squall, he doesn't say anything. He's just thinking, goes, yeah.
Yeah, they have a point. It's pretty bad.
I love it, man. I just love it. It's so funny. But Renoa, and it speaks to her character that like, yeah, she'd rather they don't do this, but it's not the end of the world that they're making fun of her.
Yeah.
If Squall was receiving that type of criticism based on something he really did try hard to do, he just didn't do it very well, it would break him because he would like, I can't take this, like I'm leaving, I hate you all, like bye.
Yeah.
Bye forever.
Yeah.
But Renoa, she gets the criticism, you know, it doesn't make her feel great, but she's okay with it because
she's like, oh, she tries to play it off like she did intentionally.
Yeah,
it represents my hatred
because I hate the president.
The president.
And they're like, yeah, you must really hate the president.
That line from Selfie, man, you must really hate him because that's the ugliest thing I've ever seen.
And you know what's funny? Because I don't know, how does it look in the remastered version? Can you tell that it's ugly or not? Because you can't tell.
It looks the same as all the other cars.
Okay, yeah, me too. So the PS1, I'm looking at it and it's all pixelated, and I'm like, it's the red one, I guess they're talking about, but I don't.
Yeah,
it's fine as far as I can tell. It looks like all the other cars.
It looks all the same. It looks the same as the other ones. Yeah.
So so they end up kidnapping the president, and it turns out that
train
was
sequence,
not
that
the
train
president.
heist is really exciting. By the way, it's a very fun
With
little sequence to play.
Codes,
entering the codes,
and
trying to go up and down before they come and see you, and the pre-rendered backgrounds are really beautiful.
They're actually really well done.
Really like give this sense of speed. You're running across. It's a really cool sequence.
Yeah.
It's a very exciting action sequence. I like it a lot.
And the once you get in and you get everything fixed, right? The president turns out to be a what's the word?
He's a monster.
He's not the president, but he's a double. He's a body double.
Like a body double,
right?
but he's like actually a zombie.
But not really a human. Yeah, and you can kind of tell because the way he's talking, there's something weird with him.
Yeah.
It's like different letters are capitalized, and he's like not sounding right?
Yeah.
So you know that like something's off. So it's not the president because they seeded out all this false info, and of course the timber resistance types all kind of fell for it.
They took the bait.
Yep, and they did this dumb thing, and then Squall even brings it up later. He's like, you guys, like, this is so hastily put together. You guys aren't, like, doing this right. Like, you're completely screwing this up, and you're involving us, and we're all going to die because of you. And he doesn't say it in so many words, but that's basically the gist he's getting at. And I feel that way too, and this is when I mentioned this is my favorite parts of the game and my least favorite parts because that's the reason why I started to really not like Final Fantasy VIII the first time I played it, was because of how these characters were acting. They were doing these huge things, but they were just like, it was like when I was 10 and I was playing a game and like, hey, we're going to go spy on the neighbors, or I don't know, but it's just something dumb.
It was like the spy plots we came up with the movies we made.
Oh, with the movies we made. Yeah,
the
with
spy plots that we made for our Mission Impossible and James Bond movies that we made as like 12 and 15-year-olds.
And the only safe place on the earth was Hawaii.
Because
with all the nukes.
The nukes would destroy the whole planet. But he's going to go to Hawaii and like chill in Hawaii. That was like the entire plan of the villain of the movie.
Plan.
I'm going to nuke the whole planet. Hawaii's the only place left. I'm just going to chill on the beach and like retire in Hawaii.
It's like, well, wait, why? Okay.
Anyways, it has that feel to it.
It has that feel to it. It has the feel that not only are these kids, but the story was written by adults. It feels like the story was written by kids as well.
Yeah.
And that's maybe it's a bit of a criticism that I still kind of hold to a little bit because there's something weird going on here that these kids are doing all this stuff. But, I'm over it. Like, it's fine. I get it. It is what it is. And, the game is still a great game. But that is something, every time I see it, I'm just like, and it just keeps getting worse because their plans, like, kind of get ruined. Like, oh, no, this thing happened. Okay, hold on. Let's talk for a minute. And then they'll squat and talk amongst you. Okay, now we're going to hijack the telecoms tower with the radio message. And we're going to, and it's like, okay, did you just come up with this?
Declare our independence on TV.
Wouldn't that be cool? Wouldn't that be cool, guys, if the first broadcast was us? And it's like, okay, yeah, every kid thinks that, but what are you doing? Like, and then their plan somehow, like, technically kind of works, and it's like, it's just weird. Like, I know it didn't work the way they wanted.
Well, they're going to go in there, and then he's so critical of her, right? To Renoa, he's so blunt, and she's like, fine,
runs away,
we'll cancel this plan, and we'll get back to you later. But we forgot to mention this. Sid essentially in the contract, like, turned them into
free reign.
Turned them into slaves of Renoa's group until Timber gets his independence.
It's like, oh my gosh, this is.
It's like, what is Sid doing? Again, I think this is something that we need to pay attention to as how is this going to get paid off later?
Because
Final
Sid
Fantasy
knows
VIII,
what he's doing.
Final Fantasy VIII is very hit or miss on its payoffs of these mysteries it's setting up. So just pay attention to it. Sid has, obviously, has some level of, there's something going on between him and the garden faculty.
Yeah.
They're opposed in some way.
Yeah.
And he's doing stuff that they don't approve of. He's trying to do things that they're trying to stop him from doing.
Yeah.
And one of those things apparently was turning Squall and company into slaves of Renoa for a while.
So this whole company.
Why did he do this?
It's like
pay attention for
these
later.
brand new recruits, and it's like, hey, we're sending them away for literally forever because who knows when Timber is going to get their independence?
Yeah.
It's been however many years up to this point already. Yeah. So, anyways, the president's not really the president. That whole thing kind of just goes bust. They regroup. They decide, let's do another plan. Okay, let's figure out. Oh, the telecoms tower. Okay, they just talk to people in town, and there's military activity over here. Okay, so they start moving over that way. And the telecoms tower is interesting because in Dalit, that was all they really cared about. When they invaded and did all their things there, they just wanted the telecoms or the telecommunication tower. And then in Timber, they've got this big, like studio telecoms tower thing that they're looking for.
They haven't used in.
That hasn't been used in forever.
Long time.
And there's like screens on it, and they just display nothing but static.
Again, because of the worldwide radio interference.
Yeah.
Okay, so I want to point something out really quick. We're going to talk about this in depth in a future episode. We will return to this. But I just want to point your attention at it now. If you look closely at that screen that's in the background, the one that's sort of displaying these jumbled letters, just take a hard look at that and see if you can find anything there. Because there is something really interesting. A subtle little clue that they put into that jumbled mess of letters there in the background. There is something intentional that you can find in there. Don't look it up online if you haven't seen it yet. Don't spoil it for yourself. Because we will be talking about it later. But just take a look at that and see if you can find anything interesting in there. That's all I'll say for now. Just pay attention to what's on that screen in the background.
They can't do any broadcasting over the air.
And I think that's part of the reason why the president has to be in Timber. He couldn't remotely broadcast. They had to fix this one thing, and then he had to do it right then.
Yeah, they had to fix the tower in Dalit, which would allow them in Timber to use the radio, the television station to broadcast this message.
And it was funny when the broadcast starts because the guy in the beginning, he's just like, "Are we live? Really? It worked? Oh,
yeah.
Right now? Oh, hey guys, so we're here. This is the first broadcast in 17 years." And it's funny because it's like there's a little bit of he's kind of ad-libbing there, and then the president comes on. But yeah, they plan this whole mission, and there's some fun, that guy who's like drunk and he's at the door and he's like all mad at the Timber Resistance because they ruined his day.
Yeah.
Again, he lost his card.
He give him the card and he's like,
and so you give him the card and he's like, "Oh, you can keep it. Here's another card." It's like, wait, you were upset about this. Like, what's going on? And he's like really happy that you found his card. So happy that he just gives it to you and more beyond that. So that's just kind of silly. But, I kind of forgive that. You see a lot of that kind of stuff in Timber. And especially with the kid who he wants to charge you when you go up to his room and he wants to charge you
that was funny
money.
Too. And then mom comes in and freaking spanks him
Once again,
different time.
Well, and different country. Hitting is a little more common in the East Asian countries. But it's funny. It's like, how often do people go up to this kid's room to look
Yeah,
out the
to
window?
look at the window.
I
What's
think
going
it's
on with
common,
that?
actually. So anyways, they make it to the comms tower, and they're going up, and there's like this announcement. They're like, what's they don't really know what the point is of this whole broadcast, but there's going to be a broadcast. And so that's when this falling out happens. That's when Renoa gets really upset, and Squall really kind of lays into her. But to Squall's credit, he didn't say any of this up front. She kind of forced it out of him. She's like, say what you're thinking.
Him for it.
And he's like, I don't want to tell you what I'm thinking. She's like, fine, I'll give you an order that you're contractually obligated to follow. What are you thinking? I order you. And so he tells her, and she gets all mad because it's not nice.
And then again, it's not nice, again, but Squall is not wrong. Like,
no, at no point is he wrong. And it's the thoughts that I have of
Yeah.
like, are you guys joking? You're just going to kidnap the president? Like, this is stupid.
Yeah.
And so it's actually kind of validating and nice to have a character that thinks that way as well, because that's what I'm thinking.
Yeah.
Like, it almost made me want to stop playing the game the
Yeah.
first time, because I was like, this game is stupid. But then Squall is like, hey, you guys are being stupid. Is this a game? And it's like, okay, Squall gets it.
Yeah, exactly. And like, again, this is just kind of part of his personality. Some people get so, I don't know, like offset by how he speaks.
Yeah.
Like it's like, but you pay attention to what he's saying. There's nothing about what he's saying that's wrong.
He is 100% right.
He is
but at the same time, he's
totally
like,
right.
hey, we have a job to do and we'll do it.
Yeah.
So you want us to go in there and fight a whole army for you and die? Whatever. Like, it's my job. I have to do it.
Yeah.
Like, this is what I do. I'll risk my life for it. But I don't like it. Like, this is stupid. So.
And then Seifer interrupts the
that's freaking crazy. And then Quistis
is
as
also
well.
there.
So that just comes out of the blue. Even playing it the second time, I forgot that that's how that happened. And I'm like, all of a sudden, and I'm like, oh yeah, wait, what? That's crazy, because they're like, we can't just go in there. There's too many guards. And then all of a sudden, Seifer's there, so I guess he killed all the guards, right? Because he's a beast. Their son Quistis is there too, so they kind of work together. But Quistis is like chasing him.
She's trying to stop him.
At first, it's like, oh, they got a different order from a different resistance to do the same thing we're doing. But it's like, no, Quistis the whole time has been following him here, telling him, come back, stop, don't do this.
Yeah.
But he is doing this because he knows Renoa personally. And that's one of the things that gets revealed here. Renoa, and I don't think this is a spoiler, I think we find that out in disc 1. She dated him for a while, or something like that.
In the last summer.
Yeah.
Because
The year
Selfie
before.
asks, was he your boyfriend?
Yeah.
And she's like, well, I don't really know. Like, obviously, they shared something.
So it was complicated, but something happened, right?
But, that doesn't really say what it is, but she likes him.
She
clearly.
likes him a lot, yeah.
And
he likes her a lot, because he's willing to do crazy stuff for her.
well, yeah, and this is another element. This playthrough has really revealed to me how well I feel Seifer is handled as a character, in a way that I hadn't really noticed in previous playthroughs. Like, and Quistis talks about this after the sequence ends and you go back to the house and you're hiding out for a bit. She says, when he heard that the three of you had been sent by yourselves to do this, he got pissed.
Right.
He was like, there's no way that they can...
Only 3 brand new freshman members of Seed?
Yeah.
He's like, that's not going to cut it.
So, like, he was concerned
Right.
about them, and he was concerned about Renoa, and so he came, he didn't think about it, he just acted on his emotion. He's like, I'm abandoning Seed, I'm running over there, and I'm going to help him. Right?
Yeah.
And he essentially succeeds in doing so.
He does what they possibly couldn't do themselves. They weren't going to go in there because they were like, there's too many guards.
But the problem is that now he's in acting so irrationally without thinking through the plan, right? Even though he was successful in what he set out to do, he backs himself into a corner where there's no answer to this.
I know, and he's holding the president hostage.
Yeah.
And it's like, where are you going to go?
Where are you going to go? And Seed is going to disavow everything you've done.
Yeah.
Right.
So you're on your own.
Seed. You have no more ties with Seed now. You're done with Seed. They're not going to help you with this. And Zell, being the dummy that he is,
I know,
just kind of like speaks out of turn and reveals that they are Seed members.
Yeah.
And so President Dung's like, okay, anything happens to me, Balamb, we're going to retaliate on Balamb Garden.
Missiles, everything.
And you guys are toast. And Seifer's just like, nice job, chicken wuss, right? Like,
the best insult
which
ever.
is his like his insult for Zell, right?
I love it.
And it's like, nice going. Not only did you essentially like ruin it for Balamb Garden, or for me, right? But also for everybody else at Garden. And like, nice work.
And he's really worried too, Zell, as they go on throughout. He's like, man, if something happens to Garden, like, it's all my fault.
Yeah. But what I love is that, like, Seifer essentially has no choice here. Like, he has nowhere to go.
Yeah.
If Galbadia catches him, they'll execute him.
Yeah.
If Garden catches him, they're not going to help him.
Yeah,
like
and-
he
and
has
he's gone
nowhere to go.
anyways. Yeah, yeah.
And so when Edea, when the sorceress shows up and essentially offers him to be her knight, what else is he going to do? Now, there's also more to this. We're going to talk more about Seifer and his romantic dream, right? This is something, again, that's not like really evident in the main plot. You kind of have to search for this.
Okay.
But he has this romantic dream of being a sorceress's knight that comes from a film that he watched, which we will talk about in a later episode. I think you know where I'm going with this. There's a movie that he saw where he got this, again, a little bit of emotional immaturity on his part.
Yes,
this
it's
dream of being a knight,
the
being a
romanticized,
sorceress's
like,
knight.
Yeah, wouldn't it be cool? Yeah.
And so it was like, at this moment where he has nowhere else to go, a sorceress happens to pop up and offer him the dream job he's always had. And he's like, well, yeah, I'm going to do that.
Right.
So, like, what else is he going to do?
And sorceress, I don't know if sorceress is necessarily the right word. I wonder what it is in Japanese. It's like, I probably wouldn't know it because it's one of those weird words. I probably never encountered it before. But like the way we would hear it is, oh, if there's a sorceress, it's bad. It's a bad person. Like guaranteed every time, no matter what. Sorceress, bad. But the way that they talk about it, like, oh, the sorceress is going to be the new peace emissary for the government. Oh, the sorceress, everyone knows that there's a sorceress. And it's like it references her power to use sorcery, but it doesn't reference the way the English language does. It doesn't seem to imply that she is automatically evil just immediately. Now,
it's almost like a title or a role, like a king or a queen, or it's like a sorceress.
She's the sorceress. I don't know what another English word would be, but you know, unlike Harry Potter, how J.K. Rowling was able to turn the word witch into like not a bad thing.
Yeah.
But that's like wizard can mean good or bad, but witch always kind of just meant bad.
Yeah.
Until Harry Potter showed up, and it's like, okay, but she had an upward hill battle there, but she was able to put a new meaning to that word in, to where witch doesn't mean such a bad thing anymore. But sorceress, I feel like there might have been a different word they could have used there because, especially because of what ends up happening with Seifer. It's like, it's not immediately evident that this is the absolute worst person in the world right here.
She's like a villain.
Yeah.
There's kind of some creepy music playing, but I see
the
what
music. And we know she's bad. It just seems like she's going to be bad. But, you know, Seifer's there, and you're right. I think you explained his predicament really well. So he lets the president go, and he goes with Edea. And I also felt, as that was happening, this is a very important scene, very pivotal for the whole story, that there was some element of like coercion that she was influencing or that she was using to get him to join her.
Yeah.
That he wasn't necessarily... Like, I feel like there was some brainwashy kind of something or other that was happening in that moment, too.
I could see that.
He almost seemed zombie-like when he, like, lets go of the president and walks towards her, you know?
Well, considering she clearly has the power to manipulate people's minds, as we see with Renault a little later, that's not out of the question by any means, so.
Yeah. So, that whole plan just completely gets screwed up. But luckily... Garden disavows Seifer, and the government is like,
Galbadia
hey,
doesn't retaliate.
Yep.
You find this out a little later, but yeah.
But as we're talking with Quistis, which is where we learned that Renault and him had a fling at some point together, Renault and Seifer, is that he had been sentenced and they didn't say executed, they said a different word. He had been sentenced and processed or something. They basically imply that he's been executed.
So they went to Galbadia Garden, which is where they learn all
the
this.
closest garden.
So from Timber, they go to, they essentially, that's part of like their, I don't know what you call it, protocol in this situation is to go to the nearest garden from there.
Yeah, so they're all connected.
So they go to Galbadia Garden.
They operate differently. They seem to have some type of autonomy, one from each other, the gardens, but they are still connected at some level. Yeah. They're connected to each other.
And man, this is something that they do really well across Final Fantasy VIII, but that introduction to Galbadia Garden, that camera move that swings down, and it's an FMV sequence.
Like, not spaceships, but there's
they're like dudes like flying in the middle.
Rocket pack dudes.
Yeah, like flying around.
Yeah.
And then the camera pulls in right into you, just running straight into the garden.
Yeah.
The seamless transition between FMV into gameplay,
yeah,
they do this like
well
4 or 5 times in really impressive ways. And they did similar things in Final Fantasy VII a couple of times, but here they just perfected the
Way
whole
better.
technique.
Yeah.
It's just really, really awesome.
The cinematography's better. Everything's just looks and blends and feels better. In
Yeah,
these
it just makes those moments
Yeah.
feel really cinematic while you're still able to essentially participate, like play, move the character in these crazy shots. It really shows Quistis' flair, because he wanted to be a film director, right?
Oh, there you go.
Final Fantasy previous to 7 had always been very operatic or thematic in more like theater in its presentation, right? And that was mostly off the back of Takashi Tokida's influence.
Okay.
He had wanted to be an actor. He had been in theater. He was a theater major.
Sure.
But when Quistis stepped in, he wanted to be a filmmaker. And so,
Right.
anyways, the cinematography is
It's very
freaking
good.
fantastic. And
Very
I love those shots where you think it's FFV, and then there's another one with the float during the parade later on where you and
Yes.
Irvine are kind of running through this parade, and everything around is in
Everything's
FMV,
moving.
and you're
Yeah.
like running through it, and the shots moving at the same time. It's just really dynamic. It's very, very cool.
Yeah, very well done. So on a technical level, Final Fantasy VIII is like just top level for the PS1's ability.
Amazing.
So good.
So they go to Galbadia Garden. They're kind of waiting there in the room while Quistis, who knows the headmaster of Galbadia
Yes,
Garden,
so she just shows
explains the situation.
Yeah.
And then she comes in to inform us about what happened,
To Seifer.
whether Balamb Garden is in trouble, what happened to Seifer, and she basically lays on the news Seifer has been fetching executed.
Yeah, he's out.
And that's a big blow to everybody, even the
It
people who
actually
didn't like
is
him.
even Zell.
Even me.
Yeah, sure.
I actually
It's like,
liked
wait.
Seifer this time, and I
Yeah,
was like, "Oh
nice.
man!" Even though I know he's not. I know he's not.
I know.
But like,
And,
it's
yeah.
like, "Oh man!" Like Seifer,
No way. Forever?
Yeah.
He's gone?
that kind of sucks.
So, and Zell, even, especially as this is the moment that we learned that Renoa thinks very highly of Seifer. And she even mentions him several times. I think even before this, she'll be like, "Oh, do you know Seifer?" And Squall's always like, "Yeah, I know Seifer." Like he just rolling his eyes, like, "Yeah, let's not talk about him." But at this moment where she's like, "I really liked him. There's more to him than you guys realize," you know. And she doesn't say that out loud, but that's kind of the message that you get.
Yeah.
There's more to Seifer than we understand so far. And even Zell is like, "Man, I really didn't like the guy."
You know, I really
but that
like
shouldn't happen.
kind of the lead up to this too with Zell, because after Zell blurts out that they're from Balamb Garden,
Yeah.
every time you approach him, he is silent. He's really beating up on himself because he's
Right.
deathly afraid that he's essentially
Yeah.
led to the downfall of Balamb Garden, and they're all going to get attacked by Galbadia, and everyone's going to die. He's really scared about that. And okay, so in the house when you're hiding out, he's totally quiet. You get on the train after that, he's totally quiet. And then you're going through the forest leading up to Galbadia Garden, which is where the second Laguna dream happens.
Yes.
And he comes at Squall,
that's right, we
and
skipped that.
he's like, hey,
Yeah.
you know, like, do you think they're really going to do it? Do you think
Yeah,
they're really going to
yeah.
attack Balamb? And he's like, hey man, maybe, I don't know.
See, and,
And he's just not
this
supportive.
is important because what I talked about before about Squall's leadership abilities. This is where Renoa calls him out.
Yeah.
And where she's just like, you are not, like, one of the things a leader does is hold the morality. What's the word?
Build the morale of the
Build
team.
the morale, that's the word.
Yeah.
To keep the morale high. And he always volunteers to be the leader. I'm the leader. He's always assigned to be the leader. He thinks of himself as a leader. Yet at the same time, he doesn't care enough about
He has no skill in this department.
this, which is a huge department.
Yeah, you need
like
it.
if your battle unit or whatever platoon doesn't have high morale, you're losing the battle. It's you've lost it before it's even fought because your guys don't have a will to fight. And so he has a lot to learn in that department. And Renoa is very much lets him know, and she apologizes for it later, which just endears you to her a little bit more.
Yeah.
Where it's like Squall will be mean, and he'll never apologize ever, but she'll be mean, and she'll come back and say, "Hey, I shouldn't have said that. You know,
Yeah.
I shouldn't have been so hard on you."
Yeah.
And he never does that.
Yep.
Because he's like, "Hey, I say if I said it, that means it's true, and if it's true, that means it's not my problem.
Yep.
It's just
Yep.
a fact."
is
And
how it is.
Renoa's all about feelings and all that stuff. So, you know, she helps him out there, and of course, as he is being not a good leader, and everyone's asking him questions about literally Balamb Garden, that's their home.
Yeah.
And he's like, "I don't know. They said they were going to nuke the place. Then maybe they did. I don't know.
Yeah.
Like maybe everyone you know is dead.
Yeah, maybe.
I don't know."
And he's just a totally
And
non-emotional
he thinks
response.
nothing of it. Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, leading up into that moment where Zell realizes that the garden's fine.
Yeah.
And then he realizes, they're told Seifer's dead, and he's like, man, Selfie's like, I thought you hated that guy. He's like, I did, but he was from Garden. He's one of us.
He's one of us.
If I can, I want to get revenge.
And that's when I mentioned that Seifer's more of like there's more almost like a brother kind of thing going here, where it's like you don't like each other. There's kind of a bully, but at the same time, like he'll clap for your achievements.
Yep.
And he may like beat up on you, but it's done in a loving way, in some weird kind of brotherly
like a
way.
Ribbing.
Yeah.
Maybe like a really intense ribbing.
A very intense ribbing that scars your face.
When you grow up, if you grew up with brothers, you'll have what starts out as being maybe a friendly competition and turns very quickly into a very heated, almost fist fight.
Yes.
And it kind of has that feel to
it. Happens. But in the end, it's like, hey, we're still cool. The only difference is Seifer won't typically admit it. They're just not at that age where they'll admit, hey, I was wrong, I shouldn't have done that. So they just fight, and they never make up. They never, get cool with each other later.
And they never got a chance to, and then that's when you realize.
It's like, I'll never see him again.
I actually appreciated Seifer more than I let on, and maybe I should have acted differently.
So there's an old, I think it's an Arabian proverb that says, me against my brother, me and my brother against my cousins, me, my brother, my cousins against the foreigner, or something like that.
Yes.
So it's like, I'll fight my brother until someone else shows up, and then we're on the same team.
Then we're on the same team.
Yeah. So when they're at Garden and they're training, they hate each other.
Yeah.
But when they're going somewhere else, it's different. And you kind of see that a little bit when Seifer decides to leave the Dalet mission. Squall follows him. Squall's like, let's do this.
Yep.
Let's go. Let's find where the action is. Like they don't always disagree. They don't always hate each other. They don't always fight each other just to fight each other.
Yeah.
They do have each other's back.
Yeah.
When they're in a serious situation. So that's fascinating.
Nice touch for sure.
That's a good one. Also, the second thing with Laguna, that's where they're in the cave, and it's kind of a weird sequence.
Yeah,
it kind of felt like Final Fantasy IX.
But it has the best part, which is where he throws heroes, because they're like totally injured. You just got into a big fight, and they're
multiple fights.
They're like almost unconscious.
In fact, Kyros is like, "Hey, it's been real, man. Like we're done. We're dying here, basically."
Ward can hardly speak.
Yeah, or Ward. That was
it's and he's like, "It's been fun, guys. It's been an honor to serve with you." And he's like, "Hey, man, that's uncool. You can't say that."
Yeah, don't say that.
And then he's just like, "Oh, there's some boats down there off this huge cliff." He's like, "All right, guys, we're going home." And he just picks them up and tosses them off. And like they're hobbling. He's like supporting them, and he's like tosses them off this cliff.
And you hear them just splash in the water.
And then he looks over the edge. He's like, "Dang, you guys have guts. This is you see how high this cliff is?"
You see how high that is?
Funniest line.
My favorite.
In the whole freaking
that was
game.
so funny. My favorite too is when he decides to start going down the cliff himself. It was so easy for him to throw them off.
He tries to like
he's
gingerly
trying to,
climb
and he's
over.
slowly stepping, and then just slips and falls.
It's like, oh shit.
Oh, I love it, man. I love it. And
Awesome.
then I think that's the end of the dream, right?
That's the end of that dream.
So they wake up. They still can't make heads or tails of these dreams. They once again say, I can't figure it out. Let's just not talk about it. Let's talk about it later. All right, fine. Helps the story to keep going, so I don't mind it. And then, so they go to the garden, and basically Sid has sent a message to this garden leader, because he assumed that that's where they'd end up, to say, hey, let's have Seed go kill the sorceress.
Yeah, assassinate the sorceress.
And the Galbadian leader, the Galbadian chancellor. What's the word?
Galbadian
headmaster.
head.
I think it's headmaster.
Headmaster.
Yeah, he agrees. He's like, I thought about it for a while, and I agree. Let's do this. So he gives them one more of his soldiers, which is I forgot his name again. Keenan.
So they explain this a little bit once you get into Delling City. Why Galbadia is on board with this. They explain that Sorceress Edea is basically going to make her base the Galbadia Garden.
The garden. Yeah.
And he's like, I want no part of that.
Yeah, he's like, that'd be his office would be her office.
I don't want her taking over Garden.
Well, and also once you get to the city, you meet Renault's father, who is
Caraway,
the general
Caraway.
who is like, wants to do this too. He's like, I don't want Edea
I don't want the sorceress, because he's an officer of the Galbadian military. He does not want a sorceress
calling the shots.
Running the military, right? So they essentially
there's a lot against
Balamb Garden for reasons we don't know yet. Galbadia Garden for reasons that are explained. They don't want Edea running the show, and General Caraway for reasons he doesn't want to run the show in Galbadia. they all team up. They
Yeah.
ally to try to assassinate the sorceress. And so we're sent to Delling City,
Yep.
where she's going to be giving a speech. There's going to be a big parade.
Delling City's fascinating, by the way.
It's a cool city.
I really like that city.
Yeah.
It's really cool, and you get some traffic going. The cars are kind of driving around and
You get
stopping.
on the bus and you can ride around.
Yeah, the bus. You know what I didn't like, though, was the whole detour going to that little maze.
Okay, that was the most pointless freaking thing in the
so
world.
pointless. Luckily, it doesn't take that long, but still.
Yeah.
And those guys are pretty funny. The summon that you get,
Yeah.
they're pretty funny.
The brothers' summon is a great summon.
Yes. And the way they talk, and they think they're all that, and they're not. You
Yeah.
know, it's very funny. But yeah, that was pretty worthless.
But the way they worked it into, I guess, the flow of the plot felt very much like we need another dungeon.
yes,
Let's
Yep,
just,
it felt that way.
and they did not make a very convincing scenario for it.
Nope.
So like you get
Give
to
me a number.
you get to Caraway's mansion, and there's a guard outside. He's like, he's going to test your skills to see if you're worthy to do this assassination happening tonight.
That's right.
You're the ones that were
if you
sent.
think of this,
If you put any level of thought
Don't
into
think
this,
about it.
It's just the
It
dumbest
ruins it.
thing in the freaking world.
Yeah.
And anyways, it's a completely pointless little side quest that you have to go do. You have to go like run over to the peninsula nearby to an ancient ruins and like find a sword. That was left behind by a previous student with an ID number on
With
it,
the ID,
which is randomly generated, by the way.
Oh, really? It's not always the same.
In every game, I checked this because I wanted to not do it and just continue
They
on.
forced you to do it.
Well, I
Come
would have
on.
eventually gone there to get the brothers GF.
Of course, yeah. But whenever.
But I didn't want at that moment. I just wanted to
Yeah.
see, can I skip this? And it's like, no, it's not a set code you have
that's
to give to him. It's randomly, so you have to go there.
Wow.
And yeah, it's a little dungeon that's kind of like a little
annoying.
maze.
It's a little maze, yeah.
It's very
And then you
pointless.
free the guy from the tomb, and he's like, you know what sucks? Living your whole life on this wretched earth and then being forced into a tomb after you die. As if life wasn't hard enough. I couldn't get out of the tomb. And then he leaves, and it's like, okay, that whole thing was just a joke. The brothers are just a joke.
Really silly.
They're funny. The guy in the tomb is just funny. The whatever happened there before, everything is just
Completely pointless quest.
Completely pointless. But you have to do it, and then it's not even that long either. So you talk to this dude, and then like within half an hour, you're already right back there at the gate. Like, come on, okay, here's the number, whatever, just let me in. Like, it's just I don't like it.
And then they actually start explaining the plan for the assassination.
Yes, and you find out Renault's father is the general,
And-
which is a problem because she's
Yeah.
all about the resistance.
Anyways, Caraway is Renault's father, and it goes and takes you through this little plan. Now, there are some really interesting logistical flaws with this plan that could have very easily been fixed. It's
Oh
like
my gosh, yes.
it's just like just tweak it very slightly and it works. But mostly the plan is that there's this pillar structure kind of in the center of the city, right? And the float that she's on is going to pass through this pillar. And there's like gates on either side of it.
Yeah.
And the plan is that they're going to let the float like arrive inside of that. They're going to close the gates down.
So that she'll be,
And they're going to have
Stuck.
a sniper. By the way, I guess we missed talking about that too. Irvine,
Irvine
is the
joins the
new
team, yeah.
party member from Galbadia Garden.
Yes. And Irvin is interesting. He drops hints all over the place where
Yeah.
he is acting as though there's some fate involved, and that the fact that he's with this team that it was meant to be in some weird way. So
Yeah.
yeah.
So
we don't know
some
yet,
interesting little foreshadowing or hints
Yes.
dropped by Irvine there
something's gonna
for
be with
later
him
in the
later.
game. But Irvine is the sniper. So what they want to do is drop the gates. Then he's going to shoot her and assassinate her.
Yeah.
If that doesn't work, then she's trapped inside of that pillar.
And
so
they
can just attack as a
kill
plan
her,
B.
yeah.
Just send a party in to just confront her face to face and kill her. So that's essentially what the plan is. Now here's the problem with it. The blocking of the scene sets the sniper up behind the float, going away from them with gigantic obstructions where Irvine would have no clear line of sight.
Right.
They basically set him up in the building where she gave the speech from. The
Yeah.
float is going
Yes, they
away
go in,
from
yeah.
that.
Yeah.
You actually see this. The float is going away towards the pillar in the distance. There's no way he would be able to shoot her going away from him with this giant float blocking all line of sight and possibly an obstruction that's too solid to shoot through.
With the gate and
So, and also, why would you drop the gate first, alerting her to the fact that something's wrong?
Which
and
she
then
was
shoot
surprised by.
her?
When the gate drops, she's like,
She's
what
like,
the heck?
what's going on?
She didn't foresee that, right? So they did catch her by surprise.
I would assume you would
But after
shoot
that point, she was like,
first.
defense.
Yeah, you would shoot first. If that doesn't work, then drop the gates
Now,
and trap her.
I do have a thought. Shooting a moving target is rough.
Yes.
It's hard. So maybe it's like, oh, we'll keep her still. Maybe.
I guess.
That's one thought.
But if she has a bodyguard, which it's revealed is Seifer,
She does.
her new knight,
Yes, he is her bodyguard.
The second
and he's
something
very
goes
excited
wrong-
to be her bodyguard.
they would.
Well, she
cover,
can block
right?
bullets. She can do whatever.
Yeah, as soon as she's
just
aware,
puts up a shield. Yeah.
you
So
know.
if you drop gates, then her senses are up, and then as soon as you try to do something, she can block.
The only advantage they had was the element of surprise in that instance.
And you lose it.
And you
as
lose
soon
it
as
if you drop the gates.
Yeah.
So, and then
So-
also the backup plan is to have Squall attack her,
And
but
he's kinda
Squall
far away from her,
is with the sniper. He's
Yep.
positioned with the sniper, so he has to. If this doesn't work, run or drive in this instance.
this case,
all
drive.
the way over to the float to attack her when they have a team inside of the pillar itself.
Right, because they're the ones that shut it.
They're right there.
Yeah.
Why isn't he in that team and can just go down the ladder and attack her?
This general guy is not a very good
It's a
general.
very flawed plan.
It's a bad plan.
That
In
you
fact, all of their plans are
tweak it-
bad plans, though.
You
including
tweak it
the
just
general.
slightly and it makes sense. Position the sniper on the other side of the pillar.
Yeah.
Have him shoot before you close the gates and have Squall in the party that's
Yeah.
in the pillar. And the plan
But then
makes
Squall
sense.
can't give that pep talk because
Exactly.
Irvin couldn't shoot. He couldn't do it. And this is weird. He says some specific things. He says, oh man, this always happens to me. And it's like, wait, you're a special forces sniper. What always happens to you? Oh, I always miss, basically is what he's saying.
I always get nervous.
always get nervous
I
and
always
miss.
choke under pressure.
You always choke? How did you get to this point? How are you where you are right now?
Okay, there's a lot to unpack in the scene.
Very
So let's step back
frustrating.
1 second. So he explains the plan. The plan gets set in motion, but there's lots of really stupid things that happen. First of all, Quistis takes her shot at Renoa at reprimanding her for treating this like a game
Yes.
and not realizing
She
how
goes
serious
back
it is.
into the house, right? She
Well,
goes back
so
into...
before they leave,
Okay.
she basically is like,
yes, yeah.
this is not a joke. This is not a
Right.
daddy-daughter quarrel. This is a
Yes.
serious mission. Do you have an actual plan or not? Because she's talking about, I got
Yeah.
this little bracelet,
The bangle,
and
yeah.
if we put this on the sorceress, we can control
Yeah.
her or
It'll
shut down her
reduce
powers
her
or whatever.
powers, yeah.
And she's like, okay, when, where, how? What is the
Yes,
plan?
yeah, yeah.
What the freak are you talking about? The people's lives are at stake here. You're a joke. Stay here and shut the fetch up.
Yes.
And just like,
Yeah, yeah.
she does
She's
the
very
same
hard on
thing
him.
that Squall did, right?
But as she should have, honestly, because in that situation, someone's got to do
But
it.
here's where it gets dumb: is they go through the plan, and then Quistis is like, "I was too hard on
I
her.
feel bad."
I'm gonna go apologize."
Wait, didn't they get in their position and then she leaves
Yes.
the post
She's like,
to
"Well,
go
we
apologize?
got some time, so I'm gonna go apologize."
Yeah, these are special forces Navy SEAls right here.
What the freak are you talking about? Apologize after the mission's over.
I know. For
Now
real.
they're trying to create some drama within the scene, and again, I'm with you in your impression that I started to kind of like.
It's
It just
roll your
feels
eyes.
really
Yeah.
foolish and silly and dumb because it's just a
does.
very stupid thing to do.
yes,
These are teenagers.
yes.
They have shown consistent, like very consistent
Mm-hmm.
emotional immaturity despite their training
Yeah.
and despite their competencies. I'm willing to accept it for that reason,
Yes.
but it is a very dumb thing to do. And the result of it is Caraway tries to lock Renoa in that room and keep
Yes.
her away from the danger.
But he sets like a timer on the
sets a
lock.
timer on it, and the door's open, and Renoa leaves, and the party comes in, and they
And
get
he didn't
locked
notice,
in.
yeah.
It's anyways. It feels a little contrived. I admit. It's just not very convincing. The scenario's not very convincing. The drama I feel is created from characters having to act in very stupid ways
Yes.
in order for it to
Instead of
proceed the way it
naturally
does.
happening the way it
Yeah,
would normally
it's not like
happen.
a natural
Yeah.
piece of conflict that was an unforeseen element
Yes.
or something they have to react to now that they didn't anticipate.
Yeah.
That kind of conflict I would have rather had
Yes,
instead
me
of
too.
conflict created by the characters acting in the most foolish
In the
possible
worst
way.
part. And Renoa is so often at the center of that. But each time they're like, is this a game to you? Blah, blah, blah. She always has this little self-reflective moment, but not really self-reflective because she won't accept that criticism. She always withdraws and says, it's not a game to me. I deal with this stuff. Like this is hard for me too. And like she goes to this justification mode where she's like, no, I'm not treating this like a game. But it's like, no, yes, objectively you are. Like you're being dumb and this is stupid. But you feel bad for her because she's like, but no, I'm not. I'm not treating it like a game. and I think you're supposed to feel with her that, yeah, guys, she's not treating it like a game. But you don't. I don't feel that. I never felt that at any point. I was like, she is treating it like a game.
She probably genuinely feels like she's not trying to do that. But
sure.
But she is.
She clearly is.
Like she
there's
clearly
no way to
is trying to like. Well, she joined a resistance group to the army that her father is a
that her
general
dad's a
of,
general
right?
for.
It's
Isn't that weird?
clearly there is.
Yeah.
I don't know what you'd call it. A motivating factor for her that is beyond just, oh, I just want to accomplish the mission.
Yes.
She wants to show up her father. She wants, Quistis was right.
And Squall was right.
Yes.
They
Clearly.
were all right about her.
Right.
And she is wrong. But you're supposed to feel that she has some purpose for doing this and that she's not all silly, gamey the way that she seems.
Right.
I don't feel that. But
And so then
you do
her plan
get that later.
is to go put the bracelet on the sorceress.
Just by herself. Hey, Queen, can you put this
for
thing
some
on?
reason, there's no guards. There's no
she sneaks in
detail,
through like a
security
sewer.
detail.
Yeah.
She just climbs up some boxes and just walks in the back door.
And you know how they explain
nobody
it?
tries to stop her.
In the case of the president, they're like, oh, he hates his security. Anytime the security shows up, he's like, oh, what are you doing? You know, and that's how they get around not much security for the president. Apparently, the Sorceress is the same way. Does nobody want security for themselves?
I know.
Ever, especially knowing that people are always trying to kill you, and yet you're just constantly not wanting security around you.
It just feels silly.
They just did it as a plot device.
It's
that
just
no security,
because
so this could happen.
They wanted Renoa to get mind controlled by the Sorceress. That was the destination, and the way they arrived at it is kind of dumb.
They just kind of did, whatever can help us get there. Yeah, it's cheap. It's cheap. And that's my criticism. It's not that these are kids and they do dumb kid things. It's that the writers sometimes seem like kids.
It seems a little lazy in terms of construction of the scenario, right? It's not very well thought through. No. It doesn't, and this is the first point in the game where I really felt that.
Was there?
Like up to this point on disc 1, I was like, I'm kind of on board with Final Fantasy VIII. It's kind of this is a cool story. But right around this point, it was just like this scenario just didn't feel very well executed to me at all. And it's the plan, it's all the things that go wrong and why they go wrong. It's why is there no security detail around the Sorceress? Why this? Why that? I'm just sitting there asking questions the whole time instead of just enjoying the scene.
Playing the game,
Right? But anyway, she gets in there. And she's just like, excuse me, Miss Sorceress, and she just tries to walk up there, and then, but that's kind of a cool moment though. She's just not looking at her.
It is fascinating.
Bam! Just starts freaking just throws her back
and lifts her up by one arm.
Lifts her up by one
That's
arm,
pretty crazy.
Drags her around, and she's just it's just like she's not even she's not looking at her.
She's not even
it's almost
trying,
like she's giving no energy to it. It's just just dismissed, just flicks her away with her mind almost.
Yeah.
So that was kind of a cool visual shot, right? And she gets up and she goes out to give this speech in front of the people.
The speech is interesting.
And so let's talk about the speech a little bit.
Why is everyone cheering?
So
the whole time,
as
she is saying, "You foolish peons, you're so weak and pathetic," and they're all like, "Yeah!" They cannot get enough of it. They love this woman, and they're just cheering the whole time.
So the English version and the Japanese version of the text, what she says is a little different.
Yeah.
And when I read the Japanese text, it's vague enough to where kind of like, this is kind of a cliche you see sometimes in like medieval settings where a king or some magistrate will talk, but it's like very confusing to the peasants.
Shakespeare
and they don't
often
know
did
like
that, yeah.
exactly what they mean. They don't know whether they should clap or whether they should be.
This is it, Bilbo. I don't like half of you half as well as you.
I
you
should
deserve.
like
that
whole thing, and they're like trying to work through
in
it.
In the books, Tolkien
Yeah.
writes, he says, and the audience tried to work out whether or not it came to a compliment.
Yeah.
They just didn't get it. So okay.
So I could see in the Japanese text maybe that they are like confused by what she's saying. Like it's vague enough to where they don't know if she's threatening them or not. To where they could be like
nervous, yeah.
But
like,
in the
what's
English
going on?
text, it's like she's flat out threatening them.
100% and calling them stupid and
they're just
the lowest intelligence people on earth who speak the language will understand that she is not she's not their friend.
Yeah. So let's look at the text.
Yeah.
So she says, "How you celebrate my ascension with such joy, hailing the very one whom you have condemned for generations. Have you no shame? What happened to the evil, ruthless sorceress from your fantasies, the cold-blooded tyrant that slaughtered countless men and destroyed many nations? Where is she now? She stands before your very eyes to become your new ruler."
LOL.
And a new era has just begun, and that's when Delling steps in. He's like, what are you doing?
You're the peace ambassador. You're not like
Exactly.
the ruler.
He announced on television for the first time in 17 years that she was going to be the one to be the ambassador to reunite
exactly
these countries and help them communicate again. And the first thing she does is start threatening people. And so he's like, what are you doing?
And she
so
kills
she
him,
turns
like right then.
and just kills him.
Yeah,
this
that's
is
wild.
your reality.
And the crowd keeps cheering.
Yeah, this is
His
your
president
reality.
just got murdered in front of them, and they're like, it's a show. Keep it
No
going.
one can help you. Sit back and enjoy the show. Rest assured, you fools, your time will come. This is only the beginning. Let us start a new reign of terror. I will let you live a fantasy beyond your imagination. Let us end this ceremony with a sacrifice. This is apparently, I can't speak for the accuracy of it. This is somebody on game facts like forums. But apparently,
we'll take their word for it.
I'm taking their word for it that this is closer to the original text in Japanese. We witches have lived in your fantasies for generations, foolish fantasies of your own creation, witches garbed in terrible apparel who curse and kill innocents with cruel rituals. They use merciless spells to burn green fields and freeze your warm hometowns. How boring. That's not so much a threat as it is just a call out of how they viewed her. It's almost like
it's different. It's like, witches used to be this, and people are like, yeah, they did. Yeah,
kind of like Michael Jordan in his
documentary.
In his Hall of Fame.
The speech.
His speech in the Hall of Fame. He basically just like called out all the people who doubted him the whole time.
Really?
Right? He's just like, high school coach, I invited you here to embarrass you in front of people. Look where I'm at now. Like, he basically used it as a way to like
That's so Jordan.
point people out and like get back at them. And that's kind of what that feels like. It's not so much a threat to people. It's like, you have viewed us this way. Like,
you didn't think I could do that. You think that I'm just evil. It's almost like, hey, throughout history, witches have been viewed poorly. But look at me now as your ambassador of peace. You know, it looks like she's headed towards some ironic kind of statement in a speech here.
Yeah, she goes on to say, do you breathe sighs of relief because the fearsome witch of your imagination is on your side? Which of us is the one that dreams fantasy upon fantasy? She's basically just calling out their hypocrisy in this speech, right? It's not as threatening to them. And then Delling walks up, what are you doing? Reality is not so sweet. Reality is never so sweet. So run, fools, into your fantasies. In the fevered world of your imagination will I dance for you. The witch of terror shall dance through all of eternity. You and I together will create the ultimate fantasy. This is kind of,
Now, she does say you fools, right?
You fools.
But
in it,
she's also promising them like a brilliant future,
yeah,
it sounds like.
Even life and death are but an exquisite dream. Eternal be the witch in the fantasy. Eternal be Galbadia, her slave. Oh yes, an evil witch needs a sacrifice in a cruel ritual. So
it's not like super rosy, but it's better than the English one.
It's a little bit different, at least.
Yeah,
it
it's
wouldn't
different.
immediately cause, or it wouldn't immediately cause people to start like running away, right?
Right.
But even in both instances,
It's a little weird.
it's a little weird that a parade happens afterwards
Yes, and
and
everyone's just
people
really
celebrate. Now,
It's like, could they really even hear her talking?
So-
I don't know.
what I've heard some people do to try to like parse this or make it make sense is to say that, well, clearly she has the power of mind control over Renoa.
yeah.
Maybe she's mind controlling the whole crowd.
Why didn't she
or
mind
something.
control the president?
But
Why didn't she mind
this
control
is
the
this
assassins,
is where
the seeds?
when you have soft magic and you don't define it,
I know.
you start to it creates more
Because
questions.
there's thousands of people there.
How
can she really control
can she-
that many?
How many minds can she control at one time? If she can just take over the entire city of Delling or the entire crowd, why not all of the world? Why not, like,
Right.
where is the limit to this
where's her
power?
limit?
And what's the point? If you can mind control everybody, you could just do whatever you want. Like
Yeah.
there'd be no
Yeah.
conflict in the story for
You
the
wouldn't
villain.
need to vie for power.
Why isn't she mind controlling Squall?
Yeah.
He's in the crowd
Yeah, he's right
watching right there. He's
Yeah,
not mind
he's not.
controlled.
It's true.
Irvine's not mind controlled. Caraway's not mind controlled. President Delling wasn't mind controlled. The rest of the party's not mind controlled. Why are they exempt? And everybody else in the crowd, it does that. I'm not convinced. I don't believe that.
In relation to this point, some people were talking about in the comments when we uploaded it to the archive channel that this could be explained. The fact that the party is not affected by whatever magic Edea might be using to sort of like muddle the minds of Renoa and the other people in the crowd. They're saying that GFs might be the reason why their minds are protected. I still really don't buy that. One, because there's no attempt made to explain any of this, right? Like this is all speculation on the side of players of the game. Nowhere does it explain that Edea has this power, and nowhere does it say that GFs have the ability to like guard one's mind against a sorceress or something like that. I think some people are sort of coming to that conclusion based on the fact that Seed was established to fight the sorceress. And so maybe, these GFs have been used to protect them, protect their minds against the sorceress's power. However, there are seeds in other regions of the world other than Balamb, and they don't use GFs. Only Balamb Garden uses GFs, right? So I don't think that if it was known that GFs could do this, that they would, only be training seeds with GFs in one garden out of the other, the other three in total. In addition to this, President Delling is standing right there on the platform with her, and his mind is not being muddled by this magic. Caraway, as far as we know, is not affected by this. So to me, it's a bit of a reach to try to justify something that comes across a little silly and to me can be easily explained. They just had an FMV background and they didn't end up changing it for the part where her speech goes a little bit, dark and off the rails. They didn't want to change that pre-rendered background. They had already created an asset for that. That seems like the most logical explanation to me. But I don't feel like there's any evidence that she has this like widespread ability to like influence people's minds in mass like this. Obviously, she's doing it on an individual level to some degree with Seifer. There's maybe some subtle hints to that. But even that is a bit questionable, but certainly for Renoa during this part, right? But the whole crowd, like the whole city, I don't think so.
I doubt the writers really were trying to make it seem this ridiculous, but it definitely does come across that way. It's a fault of theirs, I think.
What it really feels like to me is that celebratory crowd is a pre-rendered background, right?
Yes, four frames of looping.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So somebody created that as the crowd for the scene that's going to happen at the end of the game. It's a pre-rendered background, right?
Yeah.
I could see this as being something where it's like, we need all these assets, we have all these scenes. One of them is going to be a crowd cheering at an Edea speech, and that scene might not have necessarily been completed or written yet.
Yes.
So they created the asset, they have the asset, there's a time constraint on this, and it's like, she's going to give this speech.
They'd have to recreate a whole new FMV.
We don't have time to make a new background for this.
Yes, and even if they did have time, maybe they didn't have space. I mean, you're already pushing 4 discs for this one game.
Yeah.
And FMVs and their pre-rendered backgrounds can actually take a lot of space on the disc because they're higher resolution, they're, so I could see something like that.
So that seems like a more reasonable, or not reasonable as much as like, that seems more accurate, or just, that seems to me like more like it'd be why.
Sure.
It was just an oversight on whoever directed the person to make the asset, that, there's going to be a speech that might not necessarily call for people literally losing their minds cheering the whole time.
Yes, but also the FMV that comes after it with the parade. I don't know, it's just weird.
It is just kind of weird.
Something here is weird. It's entirely possible that this speech was written to be a little more subtle, and they decided it was too subtle, and they needed to just raise it up and make it a little more obvious that she was not a good person.
Yeah, possibly. So anyways,
speech happens.
That happens. The parade begins. Eventually, Zell and Selfie and Quistis are able to escape the room. They get in on time.
Yes.
And then, Squall and Irvine get in position. Irvine starts sharing all these doubts. And this is another area where I really think that they missed an opportunity.
Yeah.
I can't really speak on it too much because it's a bit of a spoiler.
Yeah.
But I'll just leave it at this.
The reason he couldn't shoot could have been a different reason.
The reason that they kind of just make it out like he's just too nervous. Like he's choking in the moment, right? And they could have really put in some nice subtle dialogue here to set up or foreshadow something in the future, and they didn't really do it. And so I'm not really like, I didn't really like how they handled Irvine in the scene. They kind of just made him feel incompetent and emotionally immature.
Yeah, this Navy SEAL is
incapable
really bad,
of doing the one thing he's been trained to do.
Thing. And
whereas
he even references that he always chokes. He's never able to do stuff like this.
Exactly. Whereas the real reason why he is having a hard time in this moment is a much better explanation.
Yeah,
and
maybe they just didn't want to reveal it at the moment.
They really could have, in a much more subtle way, foreshadowed what that reason is without him being on the nose, without him saying out loud, because he wouldn't have had any reason to say it out loud.
But he's constantly hinting at things earlier in
That's true. He does drop hints.
An hour or two before.
Yeah.
Talking about destiny, doing ... talking about things happening again, or,
what if our enemies aren't really evil, things like that.
Yes.
He says some things, but then in that moment, and that could have been a really strong moment. That could have been a really strong moment for Irvine.
Instead, it was a weak moment for the whole game.
Yeah, I didn't like it.
Very weak point. Right
and then, of course, he's on the opposite side, but somehow he shoots and the bullet goes to the front.
And she's
then,
standing right there.
And then Squall jumps down and drives a car up to her, and you have a big fight between him and Seifer and then him and the Sorceress. It results in Squall getting stabbed with an ice shard and cuts to black.
And then disc one's over. Yeah.
Now, one thing before we take off, just want to reiterate, we kind of went through, we talked a little bit about, we summarized what we played, and then we talked about some of the developer intentions behind some of the things, some quotes and things like that. So that's nice. We talked a lot about the characters throughout, but I just want to reiterate again, I find them very convincing, even though they are kind of dumb sometimes.
I love the characters.
I
like them a lot.
I think they behave appropriate to the age.
Sure, yeah.
I think that they behave appropriate to the personalities that have been set up.
And their relationships to each other seem genuine.
And one thing that this game gets railed for a lot is it doesn't have character development, people will say. This game has no character development, and they hate it for that. Now, I don't agree with that.
What you mean by
I don't agree with that. What it doesn't have is character like backstory sequences where you go do a flashback for a character's life, or you go into a town and basically just get a whole scenario written for that character, kind of like Final Fantasy VII and VI did before. right? So they don't do that. But I think moments like where Quistis takes Squall to start kind of venting her problems, these are really good moments that reveal a lot of character about her,
think so.
about him. I love even what they do with Selfie, even though it's small. Like this one little thing where she the first time you get on a train, she just stands at the door and just demands,
like, open
the door. And he's trying to like talk, and she just can't, and she's like, okay, fine. He like opens the door, and she runs in to look out the window.
Because she just loves trains, and she sings her little train song.
And then the second train you get on,
same thing.
he starts talking. Okay, with his, and then he tries to talk again, and she interrupts him again. He's like, okay, I better open the door. So he goes and opens the door, and she goes running in there, and then he goes on with his speech. And then the third time, he before she even gets on the train, he's like, I better open the door right away.
Yeah.
And he goes and opens the door, and she
she's
gets
like, you're catching on.
You're catching on. That's nice.
I think it's
character
good. And it's subtle, and it's brief.
moments.
Yeah.
And you don't have to know the whole history of a character to get development on the type of person they are, or what's important to them, or things like that. And I feel like FF8 does a really good job of that kind of character development.
Sure.
You get a strong sense for who the characters are, what they want, without having to know their tragic backstory. You know what I mean? And so I think the characters are very convincing, and that they're actually really well handled, and that they get enough screen time between them. But we talked about this in the first episode, but there is a reason why they're not telling us their history, right?
Exactly, the whole backstory.
We will get to it later, but there is a reason, and I don't love it either, but it is a reason.
But it is a reason. That's what we can definitively say, that it is a reason.
So. I like the characters a lot, and I think there is a lot of good human content to be found here too, like a lot of potential themes. There was one quote from Nojima here that I wanted to pull up. One thing that, and I was talking about this with somebody in the comments of the last video, when you talk about what's the theme of this story, a lot of people try to give a one-word answer. It's life, it's love,
those are less helpful.
This or that, and it's like, that's too vague to really know what the story is trying to say. Right. So I like to reframe theme in the form of a question that clarifies it a bit.
Sure.
For example, in the Lost Odyssey video that I did, I asked, if you really could live forever, how fulfilling would such a life really be when those around you can die?
Sure, I think that's good.
That clarifies what the theme is when you form it in a question like that. And I actually came across a little interview here with Kazushige Nojima, where he did essentially this. And I have a couple of different ones, so I have to make sure I pull up the right one. But he was talking to Sakaguchi, and Sakaguchi essentially gave him the one-word answer that the theme is love or whatever, right? And he was like, well, what kind of love? Like, what does that mean? And so he kind of arrived, and maybe it wasn't this one, maybe it was okay. Here, he says, Sakaguchi was the one who started saying the theme of FF8 was love, and well, at some point that stuck. For me, when I hear that, it's like, what do you mean? What kind of love? It was a huge challenge carrying that theme throughout the game with the space station scene, the parade, and elsewhere. To be certain, love is a theme of FF8, but in my opinion, to be more specific, it's like falling in love, but what comes after you know you love someone? When you frame it like that, now we have a specific thing to look for.
Sure.
What happens
I like that.
after you have fallen in? And this has actually really clarified something for me that before I had a huge criticism of regarding Squall and what appeared to be an on-the-dime change of character. What happens after you know you're in love with somebody, right? What decisions do you make? What comes after that?
So it may actually be very well in keeping with that.
So knowing that that's the intention, going through it this time, I wonder if it will change my thoughts on that at all. But beyond even just this, which is kind of, I think, maybe like the overlying theme of the game, or the overlying human content, you have this exploration of, someone who's trying to protect their vulnerability, trying not to show that. Someone who believes in a philosophy of, I don't need other people,
I think you're hitting something.
right?
Yeah.
I don't need people. I like to take care of, I don't need help. I don't want help. I can take care of it myself.
Right.
How far can you really get
Yeah.
with that attitude in life?
Fair enough. I
Right?
think that's good. You know, you just said, you said protecting yourself, right?
Yes.
So his primary goal, his primary function is to protect himself at the moment.
Yeah.
What happens after you fall in love with somebody? Your
Yes.
primary goal becomes to protect them.
Yes.
And that explains the change in character quite a bit.
Yes.
He's less concerned about his own, protecting his own heart or thoughts or past or whatever now, and he's more concerned about protecting somebody else.
Yes.
So an outward focus instead of an inward focus, which inevitably leads to a character change.
Yes.
Or not.
So we
behavior
were
change.
seeing the kernels or the first seeds of this planted in Squall's just dismissal of everybody, rudeness to everybody.
He goes to great lengths to protect what he wants to protect.
himself.
Yeah.
And to essentially not rely on anyone.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
how far can you get in life with an attitude like that?
Right.
And then what happens when that changes? What happens when you no longer are only looking in, when you only care about yourself? What happens when you fall in love with somebody else?
I like that. I like that theme.
So keep an eye on that.
I also like that you're bringing up the theme now, because I would assume that would be a late end of game, kind of what was the theme.
Yeah.
Bringing it up early, especially in the form of a question,
Yeah.
gives people a lot to think about as we go through.
You start to see
Yeah.
how they laid that down.
I like that.
How they worked up to that question, right? So
Alrighty.
that's going to do it for this week.
We lost a cam.
I think that cam went down. That's all right.
We got two others.
I am going to make sure that I buy AC adapters for these cameras so that we won't have power issues with them and batteries running out for next time. So, anyways, appreciate you guys. As always, leave comments. Give us your thoughts on everything.
Yeah, like we mentioned, we will be doing a whole podcast just addressing the comments and questions surrounding the game
at the end. Because this was pushing on 3 hours. So, holy cow. All right. Appreciate you guys. We'll see you next time. Have a great holiday season. Peace out.